Story 1.
Private investigator revealed shocking video of my wife cheating, leading to revenge and DNA tests. I find myself in a situation that I used to only see in YouTube videos about infidelity. I used to watch these videos for entertainment, never imagining that I'd be in a similar spot myself. It all began when I received an unusual envelope in the mail. What caught my attention was the absence of a return address, and it had 2 stamps in the upper right corner. The handwritten address made me think it might be from an old military buddy trying to reconnect. When I opened it, the letter was addressed to Mr. Unknown, which I'm using to replace my name. Here's what the letter said. Dear Mr. Unknown, I'm sending you this anonymous letter to let you know that your wife has been having an affair with Mr. Bossman, who is involved with multiple women. I read the letter multiple times. The author wanted to remain anonymous and wanted me to know that my wife was having an affair with her supervisor. The mention of multiple women likely meant that the supervisor was involved with more than one woman. I had seen her supervisor once when I dropped my wife off at work. He was a tall guy, around 6 feet 4 inches or 6 feet 5 inches, bald, below average in looks, and out of shape, resembling a heavier golem. I knew my wife's type, and he didn't fit it. To give some context, during my time in the military, I focused on endurance training. But about 6 months before leaving, I decided to start lifting weights because I was tired of feeling fatigued during workouts. I gained 20 lbs of muscle. It may sound conceited, but my physical appearance improved significantly. However, at 5 feet 9 inches, I didn't consider myself a Don Juan. Nonetheless, with my new physique, I noticed a substantial increase in attention from women. They would check me out discreetly, and one of my wife's friends even subtly showed interest once. My wife, who was the jealous type, never seemed to notice any of this. As a religious person, I never took advantage of these opportunities or flaunted them to boost my ego. I didn't flirt or have affairs, it was just a confidence boost. My wife's only comment was, if your neck disappears, you need to stop, which was a bit underwhelming but made me believe she loved me for who I was, not just my body. Returning to the letter, I took it with a grain of salt since there was no concrete evidence. Confronting my wife wouldn't help because if she denied it, what else could I do? I lacked evidence, and if there truly wasn't an affair, confronting her without proof would drive it underground. Suspicion alone wasn't enough, as voicing my suspicions would make her think I didn't trust her. What if I was mistaken? Having solid evidence was crucial. Let me provide some background about us. I'm 35 years old and my wife is 33. We met in college and got married shortly after. I also enlisted in the military, and during our time together we had 3 kids, a 9-year-old boy and 2 girls, aged 7 and 5. My wife was a stay-at-home mom, taking care of our 3 children. I'm confident that she remained faithful throughout my military service. We had a great group of friends who supported her when I was deployed. Contrary to the stereotype of cheating spouses during deployments, it's challenging to keep such things hidden, although it does happen. To cut a long story short, I was rarely at home during my last posting, and as I continued to advance in rank, it was only going to get worse. So, I decided to leave the military after serving for 10 years. I made the choice to leave. Typically, this is a pivotal moment in a military career because it doesn't make financial sense to leave after this point. Military orders are typically at least 3 years, and retirement occurs after 20 years. I made this decision to start over in the corporate world from the bottom up, primarily to be a more present father for my children, as I hadn't spent much time with them before and had never changed a diaper. Regarding my decision to leave the military, my wife wasn't thrilled about it at all. In short, she doesn't handle uncertainty well and felt comfortable in the life we had built together in the military, despite her complaints about my frequent absences. Now that I'm no longer in the military, she presented me with a long list of demands regarding where we should live, how much money I needed to earn, and other factors to make her feel comfortable and ensure security for her and our kids. She cried a lot during this period. As everyone knows, you have to go where the job opportunities are, but I did my best to meet her criteria, and we were incredibly fortunate. In the civilian world, I fulfilled all her requirements. I secured a job in the right state, within driving distance of my parents, whom she loves. I'm earning what military personnel would consider a significant income, in the 6 figures. We're in an area with excellent public schools and low homeowner association fees where everyone is polite. Oh, and did I mention that she had always complained about not being able to start her career because we moved so frequently in the military? Which is true. She expressed her desire to utilize her degree in logistics and supply chain management. She began her job search, and within 3 months, she landed her dream job, if you can call it that. She works at a distribution center where all her colleagues are women, and they report to a male supervisor, the bald man I mentioned earlier. While her job doesn't pay much, it's the job she always wanted and her first since graduating from college. I supported her 100% in pursuing this opportunity as I do for everything she chooses to do, which she has since acknowledged. Since I received this letter, I've been trying to collect evidence to confirm its authenticity. If the person wanted to expose her boss, why didn't they report it to HR? Why tell me instead? Nonetheless, I kept a close eye on my wife. I knew her cell phone password, so I checked her messages. I did find texts with her boss, but their conversations were pretty ordinary, and they didn't text much. That letter bothered me for almost a week, and I couldn't find any proof of my wife being unfaithful. She's been at her job for 5 months now, and the only noticeable change is that our intimacy has decreased. She's been turning down sex for the past 2 months, but I can't accuse her of cheating just because she's not in the mood. She always has excuses, like her job becoming more stressful or her feeling tired. Despite searching for evidence for 2 weeks, I came up empty-handed, but I remained vigilant for any hints. I often wondered about the sender of that letter and considered it might be a prank. At one point, I almost mentioned it to my wife as a joke, but I decided against it. I was about to close that strange chapter and accept that our intimacy wouldn't be as frequent as before. However, one night, my wife talked about her job and mentioned how her female coworkers were jealous of the attention she was getting from her boss. She said that they envied her because she had received the best quarterly reviews and been recognized as the employee of the month 3 times already, despite her relatively short time there. She was genuinely excited about the recognition, and initially, I was happy for her since she hadn't experienced a real job before. But that letter kept coming back to my mind. For some reason, her statement sparked my curiosity. I wondered, could it be that one of her key workers is so jealous that they sent me that letter? And more importantly, why were they so envious of her recognition? While it's common for women to be jealous of each other, this seemed a bit extreme. I became suspicious again and considered hiring a private investigator to track my wife. However, I changed my mind at the last minute because I didn't want to waste money in case I was wrong. After all, I didn't have any strong evidence or a valid reason to be suspicious. There were no incriminating text messages, just that mysterious letter, her reduced interest in intimacy, and her newfound enthusiasm for her job. It all seemed pretty normal, right? So I decided to purchase a GPS tracker online to install in her car and monitor any unusual places she might go. The GPS tracker I bought was the type that easily fits into the OBD2 port beneath the steering column. I was nervous because it's quite visible, but my wife isn't very tech-savvy. I figured I could easily come up with an excuse if she happened to notice it, especially since I often handle car maintenance. I could just tell her it's related to a fuse or something, and she'd believe me. I wouldn't really recommend this kind of GPS tracker for any covert operation like the one I was about to undertake. It was a Friday, and I was eager to see what the GPS would reveal. At lunchtime, I noticed her car was parked in an unfamiliar location. It wasn't her workplace, the grocery store, or our kids' school. It was on the other side of town, a place we rarely visited. I decided to Google the location and discovered it was a hotel. I immediately requested permission from my boss to leave work and headed towards the GPS location, which was about 35 miles away from my job. When I was about 25 miles into the drive, with only 10 miles left to reach the location, I noticed the GPS signal was moving away from that spot. I was tracking the signal using an app on my phone. I sped up, but I could see the GPS signal heading back towards her workplace. Her car had been at that location for around 2 to 3 hours, and I had just missed her. I felt so disappointed. I got out of my car and looked around the area, trying to figure out if her car was parked at a Best Western hotel or the nearby restaurant. Another thought crossed my mind. Maybe she was out eating with her CO workers because the restaurant and hotel were next to each other. But it seemed strange for her to travel this far just for a restaurant when there were plenty of options between her workplace and that location. It's not like she was a big fan of Golden Corral, willing to drive 27 miles for a meal. That day, I returned home with numerous questions, but no answers. My wife noticed that something was bothering me when I got home, but I lied and told her I had a tough day at work. I made an effort not to confront her, but I still felt like I lacked sufficient evidence to do so. Consequently, I decided it was time to hire a private investigator because I couldn't keep checking my phone and leaving work to track her down and catch her cheating. On Saturday, I spoke with a private investigator who charged $25 an hour. He wasn't a licensed investigator, but rather a person with a good camera phone whom I found on Craigslist. I agreed to pay him to follow my wife during her lunch hours. His services weren't too expensive since he only worked during those hours. The private investigator also installed a GPS tracking app on his phone, allowing him to see what I could see. I informed him about the incident involving the Best Western and Golden Corral and showed him the location. Monday through Thursday passed without any noteworthy events. Everything was routine. Then on Friday, the private investigator alerted me to some movement. He texted me that my wife was driving toward the location of the Best Western, and he was tailing her. I opened the app to confirm his report. Since he knew her destination, he went ahead of her and arrived there before her. When my wife got there, she went alone into the hotel. The private investigator took photos of her entering the hotel and followed her inside. He was also aware of her boss, as I had described him, so he knew what he looked like and the car he drove. The private investigator sat in the hotel lobby and discreetly recorded my wife entering the elevator. He managed to join her in the elevator, which was a risky move as it could have blown his cover if she had seen him multiple times and recognized him. I suppose you get what you pay for. The private investigator noticed that she got off the elevator on the 3rd floor and recorded everything. He didn't follow her out of the elevator on the 3rd floor but returned to the lobby and waited. About 3 hours later, he saw her boss exit the elevator, go to the front desk, check out of the hotel, and head to his car. He recorded the entire sequence. 10 minutes later, my wife emerged from the elevator, went directly to her car, and the private investigator kept this on tape as well. My suspicions were confirmed. She was cheating on me with that bald guy. I now had all the evidence I needed to confront her. The private investigator sent me all the recordings and pictures to my Dropbox. I compiled them into one video and came home early, before she did, with my laptop and the envelope I mentioned earlier in my post. If you were to inquire about my feelings at that moment, I would say I felt surprisingly calm because I had been mentally preparing myself for this exact situation. When she returned home, I summoned her to the kitchen. My laptop was on the countertop, where I had compiled the recordings into a 30-minute video that showcased her arrival at the hotel, exiting the elevator, her boss emerging shortly after, followed by her. I presented the video to her, and within less than 2 minutes of watching, she fully comprehended its content. She turned to me with an apologetic expression and uttered, "I can explain." Tears welled up in her eyes as she repeated, "I'm sorry." I silenced her and pointed at the screen, urging her to keep watching. Despite her attempts to turn around and explain herself, even attempting to get me to stop the video, my anger grew. I grabbed her by the back of her hair, forcing her to face the laptop. I pointed at the screen and harshly told her to keep watching. "You know what you did." As she cried softly and continued to watch, I held her hair throughout the entire video. She continued to sob and tremble. I could tell from the fear in her eyes that she was terrified of me, as she had never seen me this furious before. I must clarify that I am not a violent person, and I had never laid a hand on her or any other woman in such a manner before. However, I made an exception on that particular day. After we finished watching the video, I forcefully pushed her to the floor, causing her to fly across the room. I had a strong urge to physically harm her, and I yelled at her, accusing her of sleeping with her boss just 5 months into her new job, and who knows how many others. She responded through tears, claiming it was the only time she had cheated. I asked her how long it had been going on, and she confessed that it had been 2 months. She stated that she didn't care about him. The sexual encounter meant nothing to her, and she couldn't explain why she had done it. I yelled at her, demanding that she start talking, or I would resort to violence. She confessed to everything, admitting that she wasn't genuinely attracted to him, but, because other women were interested in him, she wanted him too, almost like it was a competition. I believe it had to do with him being the male boss in a predominantly female workplace. According to her, he was involved with other women as well. I couldn't comprehend how my once beautiful wife was involved with this guy, who resembled Gollum. She was doing so merely because other women were interested in or already involved with him. It seemed like she had forgotten that she was married while engaging with this guy and denying her husband intimacy. What kind of world were we living in? It appeared that she was with him more out of competition than anything else. I was extremely upset, and words couldn't express it. I felt like my previously pristine image of my wife had been tarnished. That night, I called her derogatory names and told her I didn't want to see her again. I kicked her out of the house because I couldn't stand the sight of her, and she went to stay with a friend. That night was incredibly stressful because I had to feed and put my kids to bed, and I didn't know where anything was in the house. I was running around like a headless chicken, trying to resist calling my wife because my 5-year-old was crying. My wife had always been the stay-at-home mom and more involved in my kids' lives than I was. I was the breadwinner, and she was the homemaker. I thought we made a great team, until now. She had destroyed everything because she was trying to compete with other women, disregarding the fact that she was married. She displayed very immature behavior. According to her, the female employees working under this guy, Gollum, were throwing themselves at him, even those who were married. It was a competition among grown women, married women, which was baffling to me. Grown women were acting like college girls, and I suspected that one of these women might have sent me that letter. Why would grown women compete to be involved with an unattractive troll-like man? This guy disgusted me, taking advantage of his female employees and turning their workplace into a disgraceful mess. I want to get a divorce, and I want her to suffer the consequences of this betrayal. However, I had relied on her to maintain our home, so it would undoubtedly take some adjustment. My unfaithful wife has been texting and calling me since yesterday, seeking permission to return home. I didn't get much sleep last night, and I have to go to work this morning. She knows where everything our kids need, including their medication, is kept. My 7-year-old daughter requires special attention due to allergies and being selective about things, which my wife is good at handling. My 5-year-old daughter can also be challenging to take care of. I dropped my kids off at school and left work early to pick them up. It wasn't as bad as I expected, but I was quite tired. During this time, I haven't been responding to my wife's texts or calls. That evening, I called her back and told her to come home. When she arrived that night, it surprised me because she came with her older sister, perhaps out of fear of being alone with me. Her sister lives 90 miles away from us. My wife must have confided in her about her infidelity and sought her support. My sister-in-law, who married young and is now divorced, bears a striking resemblance to my wife. They could be mistaken for twins, but she's 2 years older, and we've always gotten along well. She's more knowledgeable and respectful compared to my wife. My sister-in-law and I have had a good relationship for as long as we've known each other. My wife is the spoiled one in the family, and her older sister often has to clean up her messes. While I wasn't in the mood for reconciliation or playing nice with my wife, I was glad to see a friendly face, even though I thought my sister-in-law would always be behind her sister. Family bonds are strong. I appreciated her coming to mediate for my wayward wife, as she could relate to what I was going through due to her own experience with her husband's infidelity, which led to their divorce. My sister-in-law took me aside and explained that she wasn't there for my wayward wife, but for the sake of the kids. She acknowledged that my wife could be immature and suggested that, for the children's well-being, I should allow my wife back into the house. We could try an in-house separation and see how things develop from there. After our conversation, I have to admit that my sister-in-law has a way with words because she managed to calm me down enough to tolerate my wayward wife's presence. I glanced at my wife, who was sitting in the corner with a red face and swollen eyelids, as if she had been crying for days, trying to avoid making eye contact with me. It gave me some satisfaction that she understood the impact of her betrayal on me. When my kids emerged from their room and welcomed her, it eased the tense atmosphere and warmed my heart. I truly wish she hadn't betrayed me and had remained faithful. Seeing her with my kids was something I cherished because she was an excellent mother, but not so great as a wife. We lived in a 3-bedroom apartment, so my wayward wife and her sister shared the guest bedroom while the kids stayed in the 3rd bedroom. My wayward wife came out of the bedroom after putting my kids to bed and began cooking dinner while I sat on the living room couch with my sister-in-law watching TV. As my sister-in-law started talking to me, I could sense her intention. She was trying to divert my attention from my wife's affair or make everything seem normal. Deep down, I wanted things to turn to normal, to go back to the way they used to be. I was tired of being angry and exhausted, taking care of the kids alone and handling my job without my wayward wife. I needed a distraction, and her sister was quite chatty. While my wayward wife was in the kitchen, my sister-in-law mentioned that she would leave the next morning but would stay longer if needed. I told her that I was likely going to get a divorce because I couldn't look at my wife the same way or trust her anymore. My sister-in-law understood and didn't try to persuade me otherwise. After my wife finished cooking dinner, she served both of us without making eye contact or saying a word. The next morning, my sister-in-law departed, and we continued with our daily routine. I still wasn't speaking to my wayward wife, and she didn't seem to be getting ready for work that day, but I didn't inquire about it. In the afternoon, I consulted a divorce lawyer to explore my options. The lawyer mentioned that based on my wife's income, I might have to pay alimony and child support. It seemed absurd because she was only earning $45,000 a year, and she had cheated with her boss. Cheating with a superior, especially when in a committed relationship, is never acceptable. Perhaps her newfound financial independence, as it was her first job since college, had played a role in her actions. However, she had clearly taken it too far. I didn't have an issue with providing alimony and child support, as I had essentially done that during my military service when I earned less. It wasn't about the money, it was a matter of principle. If she could cheat on me with her first career boss, what would stop her from doing the same with another person in authority in the future? When I returned home that night, I spoke to my wife for the first time since D-Day. She had written a letter that she wanted to read to me. She explained that she wanted to express her thoughts without getting emotional. As she read the letter, all she said was how sorry she was. She carefully avoided mentioning the Gollum guy and simply apologized for betraying my trust and behaving immaturely. She expressed her desire for us to stay together and her willingness to do anything to repair our marriage. Surprisingly, she also mentioned something unexpected. She said I could sleep with other women if I wanted to. This revelation caught me off guard because my wife had always been the jealous type. I doubted her sincerity and told her that I didn't need her permission to be with other women because she had forfeited the right to have an opinion on that matter. I believed she was using this offer to manipulate me and alleviate her guilt if I acted on it. I interrupted her and clarified that I had no interest in being with other women, and if I were, I wouldn't have married her in the first place. This made her burst into tears, but I insisted that she hadn't explained why she had deceived me for 2 months. It wasn't a one-time mistake, it was premeditated and deliberate. She planned to go to the hotel and engage in a secret affair with this disgusting guy, risking a lot, for what? I informed her that we were getting a divorce, and my mind was already made up. I added that, despite her physical attractiveness, I couldn't stand sleeping with her or having her near me. She kept asking, "Why are you being so cruel to me?" I had spoiled my wife, treated her like a princess throughout our relationship, never raised my voice, always pampered her, allowed her to make all the rules at home, and gave her control over our household. She had grown accustomed to it. I treated her well and never mistreated her. Perhaps that's why she ended up with the first guy who ordered her around, thinking I would continue being the same nice guy, even after she had an affair with her boss. It's unbelievable, and there's more. She also informed me that she had quit her job because she couldn't bear being there and seeing her former boss's face. She said she had everything with me but managed to throw it all away because she thought she could fit in with her coworkers. She claimed she wasn't sure how it had escalated to sexual interaction, despite my disgust at the thought of her boss. I couldn't shake the question of how a guy who looked like a golem could seduce a woman as attractive as my wife and make her forget her vows. I questioned her persistently, wanting to know why she had fallen for him. She struggled and stumbled over her words while attempting to answer my question. She admitted that she had been grappling with the same question herself, trying to understand how she'd become involved with this guy and why she kept going back for more. She emphasized that it wasn't even because the sex was enjoyable. She sarcastically remarked that it certainly wasn't about his looks. The only reason she could come up with was a combination of several factors. He was skilled with words and very articulate. He always seemed to have the right response at the right time, as if he had the answer to every question. His position of authority played a role because the fact that all the girls looked up to him and tried to impress him made him appear more attractive. While the reasons she provided seemed nuanced and well thought out, all I could think about was how much I would enjoy disrupting this golem guy's party over there. I informed my wayward wife that I intended to expose him. At this point, my wife expressed a willingness to do anything to make me happy, even if we were heading for divorce. She couldn't stand seeing me upset with her. I told her that I wanted to expose the golem to his spouse. I explained that, although she had been foolish to let this guy take advantage of her, he needed to be exposed, and it was time for me to seek revenge against him for destroying my family. My wife disclosed where he lived and his wife's name. I asked her how they had been communicating without using text messages, and she revealed that they had been using her work email messenger. I pressed my wayward wife to log into the work messenger and show me the messages. She hesitated and believed it wouldn't be a good idea because it would only further aggravate me. She also expressed fear that I might harm her if she showed me the messages. I continued to insist, but she insisted that, since I had decided to proceed with the divorce, she would show me the messages when it was finalized and we were separated. A few days later, I managed to locate the golem's wife. By the way, the golem was 51 years old and his wife is 48. I conducted a background check on him to find out where he lived. He had 4 children, with the youngest being 12 years old. I made an additional copy of the video and saved it on a thumb drive. Then, I went to the golem's house when I knew he was still at work, probably involved with another one of his employees. I knocked on his door, and his wife answered. I believe she was the only one home at the time. I explained my story to her and handed over the flash drive containing the evidence, along with the anonymous letter that had been sent to me. She revealed that she had received a similar letter and confronted her husband about it. However, he denied any wrongdoing and accused the women at work of being lazy and hating him because he insisted they do their jobs properly. He had convinced his wife that these women were trying to destroy his life, and she believed him. She had never considered hiring a private investigator or suspected anything was amiss. The golem's wife was very grateful for the information I provided, and I left her my contact information as well. She expressed her thanks for my service to the country, and we said our goodbyes. I'm not certain if they ultimately got a divorce or separated, but at least she now knows that I'm aware of his actions. Last week, I submitted all the evidence I had to the HR department. I spoke with a lady on the phone, and she invited me to come by in person. During my visit, I provided another flash drive containing evidence and a statement from my wayward wife, admitting her affair as the reason for her job resignation. I believe this should be sufficient to get him fired from his position. Before leaving the job site, I decided to pay the golem a visit. After exiting the front lobby, where the HR office is situated, I went around the corner to the dock area, where the 18-wheelers are unloaded. It wasn't a very secure location, and one of the side doors was unlocked, allowing me to slip inside the building. Although I wasn't familiar with the layout, I knew the golem's name, so I asked an employee who directed me to his office. While walking through the warehouse, I noticed that the majority of the workers there were females, including the forklift drivers. It seemed like this company had a policy of hiring predominantly female employees. Although there were some male workers, they were few and far between. As I approached the direction of the golem's office, I saw him exiting one of the offices. I was about 50 feet away when I called him by his name. He turned toward me, trying to identify who I was. He may have assumed I was a truck driver there to drop off something. As I got closer and almost face to face with him, I didn't utter a word. Instead, I delivered a right hook, knocking him out cold with a single punch. Afterward, I calmly walked out of the warehouse. As I reached the exit door, I glanced back and saw a small crowd forming around him as he was starting to regain consciousness. I then opened the door and exited the building. Yesterday, shortly after returning from work, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, I found 2 police officers standing there. They had come to question me regarding the assault that occurred at my wife's former workplace. They suspected that I might be involved in the assault on Golem, but they lacked concrete evidence. From the way they framed their questions, it was clear that I was a suspect. Although I was captured on a security camera, the description wasn't very clear, possibly because I was wearing a hat. In a nutshell, Golem had identified me as a suspect and wanted to press charges. I informed the police that I was not responsible, and they asked if I had an alibi. I confirmed that I was at home with my wife, and they requested to speak with her. I agreed, called her, and she lied to cover for me. She didn't know about the assault beforehand, but quickly caught on and supported my false alibi. I'm not certain if the police were satisfied with our answers, but they took pictures of our cars, noted down my contact information, and mentioned they'd reach out if they had further questions. I messed up big time, and it's hard to believe that Golem, who had an affair with my wife, had the audacity to call the cops on me for assaulting him. Fortunately, news spread quickly, and one of the women he had been involved with had the courage to file sexual aggression charges against him. This newfound bravery might have been influenced by the fact that he was being investigated by HR and that I had confronted him at his workplace. As part of their investigation, HR questioned most of the women, and they disclosed the truth. It turns out he had been pressuring many of his female employees for sexual favors. Most of them had initially refused, and those who did comply claimed they did so out of fear or intimidation. It's a complex situation, similar to the Harvey Weinstein case, where some women were willing to engage with him to advance their careers, but once he faced legal trouble, they all portrayed themselves as victims. Nevertheless, I was pleased with the outcome. I heard that he was terminated from his job the following day. My wayward wife had kept in touch with some colleagues, so I'm not entirely sure if the story is accurate or not. A few days later, I reached out to his wife to check on her, and she informed me that they are currently separated. She explained that he no longer resides with them. She was the one who revealed to me that multiple women have filed sexual aggression cases against him. According to his wife, after confronting him with the evidence I provided, he confessed and admitted to having had sexual relations only with my wayward wife. However, it's difficult to believe his claim, especially considering that several women are pressing charges against him. This doesn't bring me any comfort. In fact, I would feel somewhat relieved if it turned out there were multiple women involved rather than just my wife. It's puzzling to me what she gained from this situation. I'm left questioning myself and my judgment for choosing her as my wife in the first place. If she was willing to engage in such behavior so easily, it raises concerns about her faithfulness during my military deployments. Writing this now, I feel utterly devastated and depressed. I've been reading numerous posts about surviving infidelity to find solace and assurance that I'm not alone in this. I also spoke with my brother on the phone, and he suggested seeking help from a therapist due to my current mental state. The VA covers various medical expenses, including visits to therapists, which wouldn't be a financial burden. Nevertheless, I'm hesitant and apprehensive about confiding in a stranger about my problems, even if they are a trained professional. Yet here I am, sharing my story with a group of strangers online. It somehow feels therapeutic to share and receive advice from anonymous individuals, gaining different perspectives and reading comments and responses. I'm still living in the same house as my wayward wife, but we now occupy separate bedrooms. Her sister has been visiting more frequently, and things appear to be returning to a semblance of normalcy. My wayward wife has been making every effort to keep me happy. Despite this, we haven't been intimate since D-Day, and I have no desire to engage in intimacy with her. I've been procrastinating when it comes to pursuing a divorce, recognizing that the more time I waste, the more comfortable I become with her playing the role of wife and mother once again. Initially, I thought my wayward wife might be inviting her sister over to improve our relationship since she knows I get along with her. However, it turns out my sister-in-law is considering moving closer to us on her own accord. With her kids nearly grown and her youngest about to enter college, she's looking to live closer to us. We have plenty of family nearby, including my parents, who are aware that our marriage is going through difficulties and that my wife had an affair, though they are unaware of the specifics. Despite her infidelity, my parents still hope we can work things out for the sake of the kids. A few weeks later, my sister-in-law secured a new job close to our area and moved here. My wife and I continue to reside under the same roof but sleep in separate bedrooms. Essentially, we're roommates now, and I've consistently declined my wife's propositions for intimacy. While it's challenging to go without sex for an extended period, my military experience taught me self-control. My sister-in-law has been visiting more frequently, and it seems she's more interested in spending time with me than with her sister or the kids. My wayward wife noticed this and addressed it with her. I learned about it later as my sister-in-law started visiting less often without explaining why. My wayward wife tends to be jealous, so her reaction didn't surprise me. It may have been for the best because I was beginning to develop feelings for my sister-in-law. Despite having harbored a long-standing attraction to her, I never acted on those feelings due to my marriage to her younger sister. I was contemplating whether to reconcile with or divorce my unfaithful wife. However, I'm increasingly inclined towards the idea of divorce. Reconciliation seems challenging because I can't bring myself to trust her again. Trust is a fundamental element in any successful relationship, and I can't share a bed with someone I can't trust. She had a 2-month affair and denied me intimacy during that time, which in my view is an unforgivable offense. My wife believes there's a chance for reconciliation, and I've noticed she's been putting in considerable effort to seduce me. She's taken to wearing seductive lace nightgowns around the house, often without underwear or a bra. I'm aware that she's trying to love-bomb me and seduce me, and unfortunately she knows my weaknesses well. It worked, as we ended up having closeness in the kitchen that night. Here's how it unfolded. I was getting something from the refrigerator, perhaps a beer, and, as I walked by, I noticed her with her back to me, resting on the kitchen counter while preparing fruits for our kids' school lunch. She was wearing a transparent lace robe with no panties or bra. I tried hard to resist, but I couldn't, because she had been parading around the house in that attire earlier, and she had already gotten me aroused. So as she leaned on the counter, her back to me, I approached her from behind. I put my hands on her hips, pulled her towards me, and then gently moved her into a standing doggy position. I lifted her lace robe, and that's when things escalated. It was probably the most passionate encounter we've ever had. It wasn't the slow, romantic lovemaking we were accustomed to. It was raw and passionate, purely driven by my pent-up desires. I noticed she reached climax more quickly, and her body responded more intensely than ever before. I'm not sure if it was my imagination, but her reaction was unlike anything I'd seen in our 10 years together. During that time, we'd always had slow, tender sex, nothing aggressive or rough. We only stopped because she was getting too loud, and our kids were starting to hear her and were coming out of their rooms. I was still in a daze when the kids interrupted us, and I should have suggested we continue in the bedroom. But instead, I went to the bathroom to finish alone. Unfortunately, last night, I had a quick sexual encounter with my unfaithful wife, and it revealed something new about her that I wasn't aware of. I discovered that she enjoys a bit of rough and aggressive intimacy. This revelation was surprising to me because I thought I knew everything about her. Before meeting her, I had limited experience with women, and I remained faithful to her throughout our marriage. It felt like I had married a stranger. In our usual marital intimacy, I let her take the lead, paying close attention to her desires. I've read books on how to please a woman, and most of them emphasize listening to her body's cues. Even the late Bernie Mac had a comedy skit about that. I felt like I had been engaging in conventional sex throughout our marriage, which might not have been what she truly desired. Last night, I took control and did what I wanted, disregarding her preferences, and surprisingly, she responded positively and reached climax faster. What troubled me the most was wondering what else I didn't know about my wife. I began to question myself, wondering if it was my fault that she cheated. Perhaps if I had been more assertive and rough in bed, she wouldn't have strayed with the first guy who took charge. Maybe that's what she craved, her fetish, and I failed to recognize it until now. I felt like all the marriage advice I had read was either inaccurate or didn't apply to her. Last night, it seemed like her body responded to my dominant approach, and my self-focus disconnected from her desires led to her heightened response. Maybe she enjoys being controlled, wanted someone to give her commands. I had always been taught to be polite and gentle with my wife, likely reading the same books on intimacy that my priest did. I'm starting to think that her infidelity may have been due to my ignorance about certain aspects of her desires. I really wanted some guidance on this, but I have no one to turn to for such questions. Outwardly, I may appear as the strong, aggressive military guy trained for combat, but when it came to my unfaithful wife, I turned into Mr. Soft and Gentle, letting her take control of our household and even our finances. It's becoming clear to me that I relinquished my power in this marriage, both inside and outside the bedroom. Recognizing my shortcomings is crucial because if I don't, I risk repeating these mistakes in future relationships. Even though the impromptu intimate encounter with my unfaithful wife was a mistake, it shed light on our relationship. I now believe that because I failed to assert myself both in public and private, my wayward wife took the opportunity to explore being controlled. I couldn't help but think that this might not have been her first experience of this kind. Some individuals on this platform suggested that I should undergo STD testing and consider paternity tests for my children, which is a sensible idea. My kids strongly resemble me, so I find it hard to believe they aren't mine. I used to be confident that my wife didn't cheat on me while I was in the military, but not anymore. These past few weeks have taught me that I don't know as much as I thought I did. I mean, if I hadn't received that letter about her infidelity, she might still be involved with Gollum to this day. I often wonder if his assertiveness played a role in her continued attraction to him. Yesterday, I took an STD test, received the results the same day, and, unfortunately, I tested negative. Additionally, I decided to go through with the paternity test, as many of you suggested. I collected saliva swabs from 3 of my children for this purpose, all without my wayward wife's knowledge. I'll receive the paternity test results in about 4 weeks. I'm not overly concerned about the paternity test results because I believe my kids are mine, and the timing of their conception aligns with when I was at home. During my time in the military, we lived in on base housing provided for married service members. As for an update, there's not much to report at the moment. I'm still contemplating moving forward with the divorce. My lawyer has drafted the separation agreement, and it turns out that I will be required to pay her alimony. This won't be much different from our current arrangement, as I've been providing her with financial support since she was a stay-at-home mom. Currently, we're on speaking terms but sleeping in separate bedrooms, essentially living as roommates. We haven't engaged in any intimate activity since our unexpected encounter on the kitchen counter. She's been making efforts to win me back, but I've been avoiding her, staying out late, hanging out with friends after work, and sometimes not even returning home. She calls my cell phone to check on my whereabouts, but I choose not to answer. She's noticed that I'm emotionally distant and feels that I've mentally checked out of the marriage. I should have initiated the divorce process weeks ago, but I'm hesitant due to my aversion to change. I'm also concerned about managing my demanding job while sharing custody of the children. When we do separate, I'll likely aim for a 70/30 custody arrangement in favor of spending more time with the kids. I adore my children and cherish every moment with them. They often prefer to spend more time with me than with my wayward wife because I tend to indulge them, buying them presents and being lenient, while she takes on the role of disciplinarian. I occasionally hide the gifts I purchase for my kids to avoid my wayward wife's scrutiny, although she usually discovers them eventually. I am the primary breadwinner, and she has been the homemaker, and this arrangement has worked for me. The police haven't contacted me yet regarding the assault, and I hope it remains that way. I've heard that a civil case has been filed against Gollum, but I'm not sure if he's in jail or what happened to him. Apparently, before I intervened, none of these. Women thought it was a good idea to report him to the HR department for sexual aggression or a similar offense, maybe because they felt their voices wouldn't be heard. I suppose my actions of confronting and humiliating Gollum gave them the courage to stand up against him. Yesterday, I received the paternity test results, and they confirmed that all 3 kids are indeed mine. Thank goodness for that. It looks like I'll be proceeding with the divorce. As I mentioned earlier in this post, I have no qualms about financially supporting my wayward wife. I had informed her beforehand that I would be serving her with divorce papers, and she cried. But she understands there's no turning back. Despite all the embarrassment and pain she caused me, I genuinely wish her well. I have no doubt that she will find someone else soon because she's still a very attractive woman. However, it's the end of the road for both of us. In our conversation before serving her, we discussed her future, and she mentioned getting a part-time teaching job to keep herself occupied. We agreed that I would continue to provide her with an allowance of $3,000 per month, including child support, so the money will be for her and my kids. I've heard that it might not be a wise idea to avoid the legal system, but I have reservations about having more government involvement in my paycheck. Finally, we completed the divorce agreement with both our lawyers present. It was an amicable divorce, and I hold no grudge against her. She clearly regrets her actions and took responsibility for them. I've forgiven her for the sake of my kids, but I'll never trust her or consider reconciling. I recently found a nice 2-bedroom apartment in a good area of town. There are plenty of beautiful women around, and I never had the chance to date since my wife was the only woman I'd been with. It's not as easy as it seems to muster the courage to ask a girl out because I've never really learned how to date. But I'm still an attractive guy, and women do check me out from time to time, so I like my chances. One more thing. My sister-in-law has been visiting my apartment more often now that I'm no longer living with my wayward wife. It's clear that she's attracted to me, and we've been spending more time together. I don't know where this is headed, but I'm not interested in dating her, and I think she understands that. Nonetheless, we both enjoy each other's company.
Story 2.
Husband reveals wife's affair, orchestrates their downfall, and begins a new chapter abroad. At this moment, I'm extremely angry to the point where I'm trembling. If my spouse, Sandy, were to enter the room, I'd better not tell you. I just wrapped up a project here in Denver, and boy, am I glad to be away from the mess back home. I've had this gut feeling that my wife, Sandy, has been seeing someone else, and tonight my suspicions were confirmed. It doesn't matter how long it's been going on, our marriage is as good as dead. It's funny how you never see these things coming, even after 8 years together. Initially, I thought about confronting them, but what's the point? It's clear my marriage is over, plus the guy she's with could probably wipe the floor with me. So here I am, feeling isolated. Only someone who's been in my shoes can truly understand this kind of pain. I'm not interested in the typical comforting lines like, "I understand what you're going through," or offers to talk about it. I'm keeping this to myself for now. I need to figure out what to do next, but first I need to clear my head, and that's not going to be quick. The idea of being intimate with my wife again is revolting to me, especially with images of her with him. Thankfully, their disrespect didn't extend to our home bed. They used hotels. Now, with a notepad ready, I'm trying to decide on my next steps. If Sandy had been the stereotypical bombshell, maybe I could have anticipated this, or at least been on the lookout for clues. She's not the big, leggy, long, blonde-haired, towering beauty type, but that's not to say Sandy isn't attractive. She's around 5 feet 6 inches, with short brown hair, a fit body, not the kind to turn heads in a dramatic fashion, but certainly not lacking in appeal. Compared to his wife, Sandy would barely score a 5. So the question is, why would he be interested in my wife? Probably just because he can. Sandy started working at Logan Industries about 2 years back, right after our son Danny was born. We have enough to get by with my salary, but she wanted the lifestyle our friends enjoyed. "Steve, if I work, it'll ease some financial stress off you, and you won't need to put in so much overtime. It'd be great to have you around more," she argued. Her parents even offered to babysit Danny so she could work at least part-time. She had a point, but I still thought Danny needed her at home a bit longer. Little did I know she was already on the job hunt. It was at a charity auction where or rather I should say, I encountered Richard Logan. My boss handed his tickets to us, admitting his disdain for such events, and I saw it as a chance for a pleasant night out with my wife. When he entered the room with his wife, everyone's attention was on them. He was tall, attractive, and wealthy, which gave him a kind of celebrity status. He was charming, and it seemed like he had every woman's admiration, including my wife's. "That's Richard Logan and his wife Connie," my wife whispered to me. "He owns 3 companies around here, and his wife was a fashion model. The dress she's wearing tonight probably costs more than my entire wardrobe," she observed quietly. "But they're likely not as happy as we are," I responded, giving my wife a kiss on the cheek. "Yeah, wouldn't it be nice to have that sort of money, even just for a bit?" she pondered. Later that evening, we somehow ended up talking to them. I can't remember how the conversation turned to our jobs or Sandy's interest in returning to work, but it stayed in my mind until Sandy mentioned it again weeks later. Richard really showed off his wealth that evening by winning the auctions for the top 5 items. When I called him out for showing off, my wife quickly corrected me, claiming he was doing it all for charity. I didn't buy it. It was clear he wanted everyone to see he could do whatever he pleased. It was obvious he liked being the center of attention. I couldn't help but notice his wife seemed to be watching him closely, as well as keeping an eye on all the attractive women there. It seemed like she didn't fully trust him. Nevertheless, 3 weeks later, I came home to find out Sandy had landed a part-time job at none other than Logan Industries in a newly established department. She was excited, saying it was likely to become a full-time role in 6 months. "Isn't it wonderful?" she said, clearly thrilled. I really wanted to say heck no, but I didn't want to dampen her excitement, so I put on a brave face, smiled, and told her I was proud. "How did you find out about the job?" I asked. "My friend Debbie works there, and Richard asked her if she knew anyone job hunting. She mentioned me, and I sent in my resume. I didn't want to tell you until it was official. I had my interview last week and got the job offer the next day." "Isn't that great?" she repeated, bubbling with excitement. "So you'll be working directly with Richard?" I pressed. "Yes, we're launching a new department focused on managing the charitable activities of his businesses. It might not seem like much, but I'll be evaluating all the charity requests they get and helping decide which ones they'll support. It's a big responsibility," she explained. I'm sure you're up for it, love, I reassured her. How about we go out for dinner to celebrate, I suggested, acknowledging we were tight on funds but optimistic about our financial future. That's how it all began. Soon, it was constant talk about Mr. Logan, or Richard, and his greatness, which almost made me sick. Occasionally, she mentioned needing to accompany him on day trips to assess different companies or sites, but they never stayed out overnight considering our son, Danny. Steve, I need to be away next Tuesday night, she mentioned during dinner one week. Richard is considering a donation for a new wing at a small hospital in Alabama. We'll visit the hospital and then dine with their board. I'll be back by Wednesday to get Danny from my mother's, she explained. Why not fly back right after dinner? I assume you're using his private jet, I inquired. Mr. Logan prefers not to rush the visit, suggesting we might have additional matters to address the next morning, she responded, assuring me it was just for one night with a reassuring smile. I wasn't comfortable with the situation, but I trusted my wife. It seemed unlikely Richard would make a move on Sandy given his own situation at home. I wished her a fun trip, telling her I'd see her on Wednesday. I half-jokingly mentioned needing extra affection on Monday to make up for her absence on Tuesday. True to form, she made sure Monday was memorable, and upon her return on Wednesday, she made sure I was content. I believed our relationship and intimate life were both strong, or at least that's what I thought at the time. Life progressed. We enjoyed a bit more financial freedom, though Sandy's out-of-town trips became more frequent as the holidays approached. I realized I hadn't mentioned my job, which turns out to be quite relevant to the unfolding events. I work for a firm specializing in testing security systems and computer firewalls, making us the experts in assessing vulnerability to hackers. My background in accounting and computers places me on the team that focuses on banking clients. Our work often involves board members requesting us to attempt breaches or disruptions within their own systems to test their security. We dive into their computer systems, targeting specific accounts to simulate white-collar crimes. Around 65% of the time, we manage to breach their defenses, which often leads to the banks hiring us to resolve the vulnerabilities we exploited. The highlight of my career happened about 4 months ago when I used a fabricated Panamanian passport to open an account at a Bank of America branch. The bank president personally showed me around, boasting about the security measures in place as I hinted at a substantial $2 million deposit. He assured me with overwhelming confidence about the bank's impregnable security, presenting it as a fortress against any breaches. This assurance was like waving a red flag in front of a bull for me. I thrive on such challenges. I gathered all necessary information for fund transfers, setting the stage for the upcoming action. My partner Kenny and I, acting like digital ninjas, penetrated their system and shuffled the financial deck. Within just 2 days, we siphoned funds from 4 unsuspecting accounts, pulling it into the one I had established under a fictitious company name. After the deed was done, I briefed the bank's contact who had commissioned the test, detailing the hows and whats of our digital heist with the precision of a master storyteller, outlining the twists of a plot. This exploit wasn't just a job well done, it was a testament to our skill and a stark reminder of the digital vulnerabilities that even the most fortified institutions face. Unsurprisingly, they were very impressed with our work and immediately hired us to fix the security issues. The bank's president wasn't thrilled about the situation, but he managed to keep his job. That's my job, and I excel at it. Over the past 6 years, I've used about 8 different identities, complete with all the necessary documents that look indistinguishable from the real thing. To most people, these fake documents would prove very useful soon. Just before Christmas, with a shopping list in hand and a nice bonus in my pocket, I decided to splurge a bit on gifts. I bought a new iPod for my wife and, on a whim, stopped by Victoria's Secret to pick out something special, claiming it was for her but also a treat for myself. With the assistance of the staff, I chose a couple of risque outfits and, laden with gifts, made my way home. Since Sandy was at work, I managed to wrap most of the presents and hid them around the house. Sandy had returned home early that morning from a trip with Richard and hadn't even unpacked her suitcase yet. I decided to help out by putting away her things. As I emptied the suitcase onto the bed and began sorting, I came across a piece of lingerie that caught my attention. It was a bright red, lace-trimmed, crotchless panty set that I definitely would have remembered if I'd seen it before. The most disturbing part was finding the panties in a used condition, clearly indicating they had been worn recently. Other than that, there wasn't anything else suspicious in her suitcase, so I repacked everything and zipped it up. This lingerie set was my undeniable proof. I had a strong sense of who was involved, but the reason behind her actions baffled me. Our life together was more than satisfactory, yet it seemed Sandy desired more. That was the beginning of the end for us. If I hadn't decided to be helpful, or if Sandy had taken care of her things herself, she might have continued deceiving me, leaving me oblivious. That evening, she was in the mood for intimacy, but I couldn't bring myself to respond to her advances. I simply told her I was too preoccupied to be interested. However, I knew I needed more concrete evidence than just a revealing piece of lingerie to take action against Mr. Logan. Given my line of work, I reached out to a colleague who had previously assisted our firm. I explained that I'd be away for a project and wanted him to keep an eye on Sandy, aiming to track her movements and company. "Bob, I just need to know where she's going and who she's with," I said. I was sure of her infidelity, but required solid evidence to confront it. "Man, Steve, that's tough to hear, but don't stress. I'll uncover anything if it's there," he assured me. Together, we equipped the house, her vehicle, and even her purse with listening devices for surveillance. "Sandy, I'll only be away for a couple of nights, at most. I want to wrap up this project before Christmas so we can spend the entire holiday together," I explained to her. "Plus, you'll have a chance to pick out my Christmas gift while I'm gone. Make sure it's something special considering all the time you've spent away this year," I added, trying to provoke a reaction. She simply stared back without a word. On Wednesday, I caught my flight to Denver and signaled Bob to start his surveillance. Kenny had already arrived, and we managed to complete our tasks by 6:30 p.m. "Let's go out for a beer or two and grab some dinner, Steve. There's an excellent seafood place just a couple of blocks from our hotel, and the waitresses are a sight for sore eyes," he suggested. "I'll be ready in 20 minutes. Just pick me up out front," I told him. I rang Sandy to let her know I was heading out for dinner and planned to turn in early, hoping to catch her before she got busy. "What's on your agenda tonight?" I inquired. "I'm just looking forward to a hot bath after putting Danny to bed, then I'll probably read a bit," she responded. "Love you," she said before hanging up, but I didn't reciprocate. Her actions had extinguished that sentiment. Dinner turned out to be enjoyable, and the waitresses were indeed attractive, just as Kenny mentioned. After a final drink in the hotel bar, I retired to my room, noticing a voicemail waiting for me. It was a brief message urging me to call back. "Steve, your cell was off," Bob started as soon as I called. "I turned it off intentionally, wanted to enjoy one last good meal undisturbed before getting your update." "So what happened?" I pressed. He informed me Sandy had arranged for a babysitter, and with Richard Logan post-dinner, they headed to room 312 at the Ramada Inn. Although he couldn't secure photos from inside, he captured images of them entering and promised to snap more as they exited. He also mentioned capturing some audio, but doubted I'd want to hear it. He booked the room just for a night, so I'll watch from your place tomorrow. "No worries, Steve. You won't have to pay for this," he mentioned. Muttering to myself, she's going to regret ever getting involved with him, I sat in my room plotting my next steps. Divorcing Sandy seemed too straightforward. I aimed to affect her deeply, crafting a memorable Christmas for all the wrong reasons. By Thursday, I had outlined my plan, actionable mainly on the 23rd due to holiday closures. Armed with a fake passport and my son's birth certificate, I booked flights under an alias, choosing a complex route to obscure our destination. Holiday travel is chaotic, making it easy to blend in as everyone rushes to finalize their plans. I took out a cash advance on my credit card to avoid leaving a digital footprint. I also liquidated our CDs and emptied our safety deposit box, gathering all the cash we had. Since I planned to travel light with just a couple of outfits, I'd need the cash to buy clothes once we arrived at our destination. The last part of my plan took 3 days. Logan Industries did business with 2 local banks, including one where I held an account. My goal was to infiltrate the bank's mainframe, access Logan's account, and route those funds to our shared savings account. Sounds easy, right? Not quite, and I had to enlist Kenny's expertise. I wanted to minimize involving others to avoid getting anyone else implicated if I encountered any issues. Kenny was my go-to for solutions. I decided on a practice run before taking any real action. Although we had experience with such operations, each bank system presented unique challenges without a uniform approach. The initial attempt was thwarted by the bank's firewall, stopping me in my tracks. However, the next day, with Kenny's advice, I breached the system and spent a couple of hours navigating through the accounts to gather the necessary information. I aimed to initiate the first transfer from Logan's account to mine late on Friday, December 24th, then immediately move the money to one of 8 international accounts. Timing was crucial. During that last week, I kept things quiet. I gathered all the details from Bob and prepared copies for Sandy, her parents, Richard's wife Connie, and my own parents, ensuring all but my parents received their copies on Christmas Eve. Danny and I decorated the tree and arranged the gifts underneath. Since discovering Sandy's affair with her obnoxious boss, I had been distant. By this point, she might have guessed I was aware of her affair or at least sensed something was amiss. I had a small bag packed with clothes and a copy of Bob's report in my car's trunk, ready for December 24th. "Steve, you've been distant all week. Are you all right? Is there something you need to discuss?" Sandy inquired. It was time for the crucial moment. "Yes, Sandy, there's something we need to talk about, but I'd rather not spoil Christmas for Danny. Let's talk after the holidays," I proposed. "Well, we could still have a bit of fun tonight. It's been quite a while," she suggested, starting to unbutton her shirt. That's when I decided to confront the situation directly. "Is Richard too busy to see you tonight?" I retorted, then headed upstairs to the guest room. Once inside, I closed and locked the door behind me. I could barely hear her knocking and pleading from the other side. "Steve, we really need to talk. Can you open the door, please?" But to me, facing a horde of bikers seemed more appealing at that moment. As I lay in bed, attempting to fall asleep, eventually, I did manage to get some sleep, waking up just after 7 the next morning. I got out of bed, showered, shaved, and prepared myself for what I anticipated would be an extremely hectic day. I knew I'd need plenty of coffee to get through the upcoming 24 hours. By 9 a.m., Danny was already watching cartoons, and Sandy was on her way to the kitchen. Her eyes were swollen from lack of sleep, signaling she had a rough night. My concern for her had vanished. My only goal was to get through to 2 p.m., when I would start executing my plan. "When did you find out?" she eventually questioned. "Does it even matter now, Sandy?" I responded. "Is there anything I can say?" she continued. "What could you say? That it meant nothing? You don't love him, only me, and it was all a big mistake?" "Sure, you could say that and maybe more, but it wouldn't change how I feel now. I'm taking Danny to my parents' place this afternoon, and I don't want you there. You're no longer part of this family. I hope he was worth it, Sandy, because from my perspective, he wasn't," I coldly stated as I prepared to leave with Danny. After loading the car with presents and dressing Danny, I instructed him to say goodbye to his mother. She was oblivious to what was about to unfold, and I had no intention of tipping her off. "When will you return?" she inquired. "We'll be back when we're back," I answered vaguely. "Do you have plans to go out?" "No, I'll be here," she said, still unsure of what lay ahead. As I closed the door behind me, she was crying. "Where's Sandy?" my mom asked as we entered. "Do you want the short version or the full story?" I responded, and while my dad took Danny to the Christmas tree, I shared the short version. "She's not here because she's been having an affair with her boss for some time," I explained. After the initial shock passed, I informed them that Danny and I were leaving to start fresh elsewhere and would be in touch once we were settled. "Mom, it's better if you don't ask too many questions," I suggested. "I plan to make those responsible pay dearly for their actions, aiming where it'll hurt them most. Let's enjoy this afternoon as a family since it might be a while before we see each other again." At 4 in the afternoon, I initiated the transfer, moving all the funds from Logan's account into Sandy's and my shared savings account temporarily. By 6:30, Danny and I boarded the first of 3 flights out of the country. Sandy must have tried calling my cell countless times before realizing I wasn't going to pick up. I had already turned off my phone and tossed it into a dumpster a couple of blocks away from my parents' home. Just before we caught our next flight, I moved the funds from our savings into the initial overseas account. From there, the money was set to distribute among 8 other accounts by the early hours of Christmas morning. I planned to bring joy to many kids on Christmas with this gesture. Glancing at my watch, I could only envision the astonishment on people's faces as my planned surprises were unveiled on Christmas Eve. According to what Bob found, Connie ended up kicking her husband so forcefully over the revelations that he needed medical intervention. Sandy's parents were equally dismayed by their present and didn't hesitate to express their disappointment in her choices. By the time Sandy realized we weren't returning, she had received the package containing photos, recordings, and a letter from me detailing how I discovered her betrayal and stating my inability to forgive her. "You don't deserve mine or Danny's love, so you're not going to have it from this day forth. The house and everything else in it is yours to do with as you wish. Danny and I will be starting a new life without you, and I only hope that one day I'll find it in me to forgive you, but I don't see that day coming for a long time," I told her. "By the way, since the 2 of you started your unholy union under the pretext of donating money to good causes, I've decided to help the 2 of you out. The $1.2 million from their Bank of America account has been given away under the name of Logan Industries to 8 children's hospitals in countries in need. I've arranged for these organizations to express their gratitude to Logan Industries exactly 1 year from now. Feel free to inform Richard. I hope he enjoys the repercussions of your affair as it's turned out to be his costliest mistake. Wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, I'd like to say we'll run into each other, but that's not likely to happen anytime soon. I'll keep Mom informed, so if you're in her good graces, perhaps she'll share updates with you. And if you decide to file for divorce, go ahead, I won't oppose it. We arrived in Panama on Christmas morning. I had arranged to rent a 2-bedroom condo near the capital's downtown area. I managed to keep some of Logan Industries' money for our expenses. Although living here is affordable, I knew I'd eventually need to find work. Danny wondered about his mom initially, but stopped after a few weeks. I hired an affordable, reliable nanny, and we started to feel like a family. With limited resources, I launched a software security business, avoiding big banks, but gradually gaining recognition among smaller independent clients who began seeking me out. 5 years since moving, someone knocked on my door. When I heard about a newcomer in the business here, I guessed it was you. "Can I come in?" he joked with a laugh. We caught up for over 2 hours before heading to dinner. It turns out Logan Industries wasn't thrilled about the unexpected charitable contributions and ended up replacing Richard as president. He nearly went bankrupt, refilling the $1.2 million, and after divorcing his wife Connie, Sandy lost her job once it was discovered the funds went through her account. Although there was an attempt to charge her, she was ultimately found not guilty. As soon as I caught wind of the situation, I suspected your handiwork. My hunch was confirmed when our company started losing business to a new player in town. Believe it or not, I've brought down an offer from the home office to either buy you out. He came to offer me the position of leading the new Southern Division. As I reviewed the contract he presented, the salary outlined was in line with U.S. standards, meaning that with the cost of living here, I could enjoy a luxurious lifestyle while engaging in the work I excel at, but with significantly less stress and oversight required on my part. He urged me to consider the proposal, mentioning he wouldn't be returning to the U.S. until the week's end, giving me ample time to ponder the decision. During his stay, we indulged in the local cuisine and culture, and he seemed particularly enamored with the vibrant Latin American lifestyle, finding a particular interest in a local woman. When he left, he was noticeably pleased, taking with him a signed contract and a letter intended for Sandy, which also included photos. In the letter to Sandy, I detailed how our son has been thriving in his new environment. I explained that he's attending a small, reputable private school where he has become fluent in Spanish, likely surpassing his proficiency in English. This linguistic shift is significant considering the global importance of Spanish as a language, offering him invaluable communication skills that will serve him in countless ways as he grows. Furthermore, he started learning Chinese, a strategic choice given that approximately a quarter of his schoolmates are of Asian descent. His adeptness with computers is unmatched, suggesting that he's on a path to potentially succeed me in my business endeavors. He's aware that we're no longer together, but I haven't explained the reasons to him. He's simply adjusted to the reality that he's with me and you're elsewhere. Due to obvious reasons, I couldn't disclose my destination to anyone, and after I departed, I understand that your parents moved in with you while mine did the same with me. My mom told me she relayed all the updates I sent your way once she moved past her initial anger, so you're up to date on how Danny's doing. For what it's worth, I've let go of my resentment towards you. My current partner pointed out that I was holding on to too much from the past, and it was time for me to let go and move forward. It's unfortunate how things turned out. You would have really enjoyed life here. I have no plans to return, especially since my parents are considering buying a place here to spend the winters, leaving me with no ties back home. So, if you ever wish to see Danny, you'll need to travel here, at least for the foreseeable future. Mom never mentions you, and I don't ask about you, but I do hope you've managed to recover after losing your job. However, learning about Richard's downfall did bring a bit of satisfaction. That's pretty much everything I have to share. I hope you find someone you can stay true to and start anew. As for me, I've met someone incredible. She's embraced Danny as if he were her own and brought happiness back into my life, similar to the joy we once shared. We're planning to get married soon, especially since Danny will be welcoming a new sister come spring. I'm ready to commit once more. You're welcome to write to Danny, but this will be my last letter to you. Sandy struggled to get through my letter due to her tears. After everything that happened, she never crossed paths with Richard again. Finding a new job was challenging for her, given the fallout and negative media attention. The only men interested in her now were either not her type or just seeking a casual relationship. She's currently seeing a salesman from another town, but they're proceeding cautiously. From the photos, she can tell Danny is doing well and looks joyful, and she wishes she could visit him. But finances have been tight lately. She lost her home after failing to keep up with the mortgage payments when the real estate market crashed. She repeatedly blames herself for succumbing to Richard's superficial charm, thinking she would still have her old life if not for that mistake. However, she recognizes those thoughts of what could have been are all that remain for her now.
Story 3.
I gazed at my wife of 5 years and declared, "Aaron, it's either him or me, no middle ground." She sat beside my supposed boss, Plato Giannis, grasping his well-groomed hand until I spoke. As I uttered those words, she withdrew her hand, confusion and fear etching her beautiful face. She shook her head in surprise, causing her blonde hair to gleam in the lamplight. "Just for the weekend. Come Monday, everything returns to normal. Can't you enjoy some time with Elle for now?" La is L.A. Logan, real name Ellen Johnson. Now seated next to me, she has been fervently trying to seduce me for the past few hours. A striking woman with luscious dark hair and one of the most enviable bodies globally, especially if you appreciate curves, which I certainly do. Rumors also circulate that she's top-notch. It's all part of Plato's jest. When Aaron and I were invited to this island for a weekend, the assumption was he wanted to familiarize himself with me better. I'm a renowned author, and he acquired the publishing company that released my work about 3 months ago. However, the entire weekend was actually orchestrated for Plato to have relations with my wife. I'm an average writer, penning detective novels and thrillers featuring my protagonist, Rick Rocker. He unravels mysteries of locked rooms and takes daring leaps off cliffs to elude lunatics. His bed life is diverse and exciting, effortlessly charming beautiful women. A martial arts expert and trained assassin, he's a jack of all trades. He's a fantasy wrapped in a thin layer of reality, and my books sell reasonably well, though the publishing house boasts several more significant and better-selling authors. I only have a captivating wife who caught Plato's attention. They crossed paths at a grand dinner and dance organized by Mr. G for his group of writers and editors. The event made an impression on Aaron, especially when she danced with Mr. G to multiple musical numbers. Polished and a decade senior to 28-year-old Aaron, he possessed long dark hair and a commanding presence. Observing their dance, I noted his adept movements. When the group took a break, they returned to our table, and Mr. G expressed admiration for Aaron, stating that she danced beautifully. I merely nodded, and my lack of response momentarily puzzled him. He then mentioned attending to other guests, saying it was a pleasure. Aaron smiled and reciprocated with Plato. I scrutinized her, noting the swift transition from Mr. G to Plato. I inquired if she was impressed with my boss, to which she replied positively, accompanied by a lascivious grin. I suggested, "Let's see whose wife he manages to snag, huh?" She turned out to be the wife of one of the editors, and during the evening, 3 more revealed they were editors' wives. All of this unfolded a month ago. I am Donald Lake, and I have no nickname. Standing at about 6 feet and weighing 169 pounds, I have curly brown hair, blue eyes, and am 30 years old. I am in good physical shape and athletic. Aaron, too, is in good shape and practices fencing, a sport of skill and coordination. It was at a fencing lesson she taught that I first met her. I was conducting the usual research for Rick, who was to engage in sword fights in the next book, The Adventurer. I always undertake extensive research before writing an adventure book, a key selling point of mine. Rick doesn't do anything I haven't tried. My journey to becoming a writer was an ascent up a steep staircase. I graduated from high school and did not pursue formal education thereafter. In fact, since I was 10, I recognized myself as a writer. Throughout school, I penned story after story, with 2 published in obscure literary magazines during high school. Despite considering myself a serious writer, the need to work for a living arose. After finishing school, I worked as a car mechanic, which I enjoyed. However, it didn't pay much, prompting me to start writing thrillers. Miraculously, one sold, followed by another and another. My current publisher signed me after receiving my first Rick Rocker novel. Sally Baker became my editor, and we quickly found common ground. A sweetheart but deeply married, she had elementary school-age children. While working on the second Rocker book, I met Aaron. I completed the book after receiving advice from her about a sword duel, and our professional relationship evolved into several dates, eventually leading to closeness. Our connection was immediate, and we both were delighted. At the time, Aaron operated her music store, surviving the initial stages of starting a business thanks to loans from a family trust. The store featured various instruments in one section and recordings of diverse music, along with sheet music in the other. So, fencing is just a hobby. When we got married, she was 23, and I was as happy as I thought it was possible to be happy. We had plans for children, and very soon, but my publishing house was sold to Mr. G, or Plato as Aaron calls him. One day, Aaron came home excited, mentioning that next weekend Plato had invited us to his island. I stared at her, questioning why she was telling me instead of him. Aaron explained that she ran into him last week, had lunch, and gave him a tour of the store. Today he called with an invitation, expressing his desire to get to know the writers better. Aaron suggested he would be in contact with me soon. Curious, I asked if he had been in contact with her and others. She reassured me, denying any inappropriate contact. I insisted on knowing why she didn't mention the lunch and shopping until today, and she admitted that he had made advances, but she blew him off. She kept quiet, thinking I might get in trouble given his ownership of the company. Now, with my apparent enthusiasm for the island visit, Aaron disclosed that it would be just the two of us and a special friend of his, along with the staff, to get to know us better. I remarked cynically about his intentions to get to know everyone. Aaron reassured me, stating that she could handle the situation and questioned if I was sure I could handle it. I assured her that everything would be great. However, I firmly declared my decision to decline the invitation, deeming it too dangerous for us. Aaron pleaded for reconsideration, expressing that we would have fun, but I remained resolute, apologizing for my decision. She sulked for the rest of the evening. The next day I called the main office and requested to speak with Mr. G. He returned my call 15 minutes later, expressing anticipation for our weekend on the island. I declined, stating my discomfort. I mentioned that it seemed my wife knew about it before me, having had lunch with him, and she didn't inform me initially. According to her, he had been pestering her, and she was concerned about my reaction if I knew everything. He acknowledged his appreciation for Aaron on various levels, citing her attractiveness and entrepreneurial qualities. He also mentioned my status as one of his most profitable writers. He claimed a desire to get to know both of us better. Despite his efforts, I maintained my stance, apologizing and asserting that it would not work. Disappointed, he expressed regret and stated that he wished I would change my mind. He mentioned keeping the weekend open at that point. We parted ways about 3 hours later. As I finished the next Rick book, my agent, Brock Levin, contacted me. I inquired about how he knew about my declining Mr. G's invitation. Brock explained that the vice president of sales had called him, insisting that I should attend. He conveyed the potential consequences of under-advertising the new book, which would be detrimental to both of us financially. I questioned if there was a direct threat, and Brock clarified that while not explicit, the threat was implied, emphasizing that Mr. G played a tough game. I assured Brock that I would be in touch. After ending the call, I emailed Sally the conclusion of the new book, along with some instructions. Later, she called, and we discussed the situation. In the meantime, I delved into researching Plato Giannis and his island. The island was named Hedonism, meaning pleasure in Greek, essentially Pleasure Island. As I delved deeper, I uncovered numerous stories of coital misconduct on the island, including 2 divorce cases where the island was cited as a factor. However, these stories were published in gossip sources. Several photographs of Mr. G with women, including 2 married ones, raised serious concerns for me. I located a picture of the place on Google Maps and familiarized myself with the entire layout. Situated off the coast of North Carolina among islands popular for golf and beach holidays, this 2-mile-long and approximately 1-mile-wide island faces south and is shielded from the elements. It boasts 2 piers, multiple buildings, including a large house, tennis courts, and a swimming pool, leaving me puzzled about the need for a pool with great beaches around. I downloaded detailed photos and compiled them into a topographic map, concluding that a decent boat or seaplane would be necessary for the journey. Lacking both, I know people who possess them. On that Friday evening, Aaron returned home promptly, appearing joyful. For dinner, I had a substantial chicken salad and white wine. As Aaron changed, she mentioned hearing that I might have reconsidered not going to the island. I looked at her, remembering Plato's mention of changing one's mind at lunch. She clarified, "No, silly. He's in New York, and we're here in good old Virginia. He called me, mentioning his apartment in McLean." Questioning how she knew he was in New York, I was met with a dismissal of paranoia. Aaron explained that Plato suggested ordering his plane from the national airport if we agreed to go, but I reiterated that I hadn't changed my mind. Frustrated, Aaron called me stubborn and suggested she could go alone, but I expressed concerns about enjoying myself and fearing potential divorce. I inquired about the possibility of her sleeping with him, to which Aaron responded that she wouldn't go without me. I questioned how I could let her go alone, emphasizing potential consequences upon her return and the risk of our relationship being jeopardized. Aaron affirmed her attraction, but assured me that we were still passionate, and she wouldn't take the risk. Believing her, I asked if she believed it, to which she replied not to believe her at all, acknowledging that my trust was almost empty. An accidental spill of wine during this conversation led to laughter, hugs, and kisses, culminating in a trip upstairs lasting an hour. The unpleasant topic faded as we lay in bed. Aaron asserted she wouldn't risk our relationship for a billionaire, seemingly assuming that we would go to the island. Anne commented that it was decided, tensing but not elaborating further. I inquired about her eagerness for the trip, urging her to provide the truth. After a moment of silence, she explained that it seemed exciting to communicate with such an important and influential person. She quickly clarified that she didn't mean be with, but rather communication. Reflecting on the situation, I noted that he was born into wealth and significantly increased his fortune, having a substantial head start. Similar to me, he pursued relationships with women. Despite my concerns, Anne affirmed her belief that everything would be good and fun. Considering that we were on the verge of trying for children, I recognized that this could be a potential time for Aaron to stray. Doubting her honesty, I reluctantly agreed to the trip, warning Aaron that if she ended up with this guy, it would be irreversible. She acknowledged the warning, expressing her gladness about the decision. Deciding that this warning was my last, I saw it as a test of her worthiness as a wife. Temptation would reveal the truth, and time would be the judge. The following day, I accepted the invitation and made contingency plans with my friend. I also checked the island's cellular communication availability. It was there. Still, as a precaution, I brought my satellite phone. The small plane from the national airport landed at a small airport, greeted by a man named Simon. He took us to the pier, where we boarded a boat with a comfortable cabin and a powerful engine, driven by another man, Charlie. After about 40 minutes, we docked at the island. Aaron and I spent time exploring the ocean and other islands. Simon briefed us on our location and island activities. He was a friendly, muscular guy with a wonderful smile and laugh, larger than me. Approaching the north side pier, with Aaron leading the way, Simon commented that I didn't seem very happy with the trip and suggested calling me Don. I acknowledged having doubts, considering Simon's 6 years of working for Mr. G, expecting him to understand my reservations. When Simon inquired about why I came if I was so worried, I explained it was to see what happens. I also asked if he was Mr. G's bodyguard, to which Simon confirmed, mentioning his presence was just a precaution, although Mr. G was capable of handling himself. Curious about Simon's preparedness, I asked if he was armed. Simon mentioned having a knife, but clarified that weapons were not allowed on the island. Expressing my distrust of the island's rules, I admitted to not being a very trusting person these days. Simon assured me that no firearms were needed, emphasizing that I wouldn't require one no matter what happened. The boat pressed tightly against the pier, and Simon, along with a young man on the pier, secured it. Aaron received Simon's hand, and I disembarked from the boat, noticing Simon's slight worry. Following Simon's direction, I accompanied Aaron toward the substantial house. Upon our arrival, Mr. G greeted us, dressed casually in swimming trunks and a sleeveless shirt. Ella, considered the most beautiful woman in the world, accompanied him. I observed her, discovering who else would join us. It became apparent that she was Helen Johnson from Jonestown, the semi-official mistress on the island and in several houses owned by Mr. G. Though she was once seen in the company of other noble men, it occurred less frequently now. Mr. G seemed to have secured an exclusive agreement, at least in some way. Mr. G extended his hand to shake. Ella hugged Aaron, and then Mr. G embraced both Aaron and Ella. She smelled delightful during the hug, and her lips touched my ear. We were escorted to a large room and offered drinks. Despite the 1 o'clock afternoon timing and a light plane snack, a small buffet awaited us. Opting for sparkling water, I abstained from drinking, while Aaron chose wine. They both sampled a small selection from the buffet. During this, Mr. G inquired about the new book I had sent to Sally the previous week, assuring him it was on schedule. Mr. G complimented my punctuality with a smile. Ella, having read all my books, expressed anticipation for the thriller involving rock climbing, flying, small planes, and a love interest. She exclaimed, "Cannot wait. Maybe I can watch it sooner." Mr. G supported this idea, turned to Aaron, and inquired about the music business. After Aaron's positive response, I humorously mentioned Marjorie's new book, predicting it would sell well. Marjorie, known as Marjorie Wright, wrote serious fiction, but still sold a lot of books. Mr. G revealed Marjorie's rising sales and reminded me of my obligation for another book, to which I affirmed my ongoing work on a Christmas-themed mystery. L suggested moving on and proposed going for a swim. Mr. G promptly stood up, encouraging us to join him, and ran out the door. L mentioned that if we had swimsuits, she would show us to our room to change. The three of us stood up, and Ella led us into a large double bedroom, closing the door behind us. In the room we changed into swimsuits. I opted for regular trunks, while Aaron chose a skimpy pink bikini. I expressed my opinion that the situation was excessive and questioned who Aaron was trying to impress. She responded that she just wanted to look good, mentioning Elle's beauty. I countered, telling her she was no less beautiful. Although she disliked my tone, Aaron refrained from responding. Upon descending, Ella wore an electric blue bikini, similar in size to Aaron's. I found both of them entirely enamoring. Exiting, we walked to the Southside beach on a wooden path. Mr. G was already in the water, swimming behind the breakwaters. Aaron conveyed her reluctance to swim that far, a sentiment shared by Ella, who shuddered. Despite this, I dove into the surf, swam to where Mr. G was using his crawl, and joined him. He was a proficient swimmer for his size, easily matched by my water-friendly body type, sometimes changing strokes. We swam until he tired, and I followed him back to shore. As we approached, a large wave knocked him off his feet, and I picked him up. He spat out seawater and sand, and I held him tightly as we walked out. His legs seemed like wet noodles, likely from overextending himself in our swimming competition. Quickly regaining composure, he pulled away, stating that he was fine and the wave had taken him by surprise. Approaching the sunbathing women, I inquired who wanted to swim. Ella immediately stood up, her top slipping slightly as she raised her hand. Both of us ran to the surf. Aaron declined, so I pursued Ella. The rear view was impressive. She dove in like an Olympian, swimming beyond the breakwaters. I followed her, amazed at her superior swimming compared to Mr. G. Swimming alongside for a distance, she suggested, "Let's turn," which I did. Intrigued by the glimpse of flesh, I let her get about 4 meters ahead, observing her from the side. She turned over, floated on her back, and her chest swayed in and out of the water. An absolutely amazing woman. Given my proficiency in backstroke, I joined her, swimming alongside until she declared, "I've had enough," and swam back to the shore, pausing briefly to glance at her from behind. Upon surfacing from the waves, Aaron and Mr. G were nowhere in sight, but my attention shifted to my snug swimming trunks. She joked about me being Superman, and I chuckled, suggesting there was only one way to find out. Taking a step toward me, she halted, stating that we couldn't do this here, no matter how much she wanted it. With that, she turned and ran. On land, she couldn't match her speed in the water, allowing me to easily catch up, and we proceeded to the veranda. Ours were missing, leaving me to ponder if this had already transpired. Elle inquired about my profession, asking if I really wrote. Confirming, I explained how I aimed for believability in Rick's actions. Elle stared, momentarily diminishing my hardness, but as expected, it returned. She possessed a commanding presence. I firmly told Elle to back off, emphasizing my marital status and expressing a desire to keep it that way. I asked her as a favor not to pursue anything further. Elle laughed, labeling me a tongue-tied writer. I muttered, "Oh my God," and suggested checking on Aaron and Mr. G. I asked if it mattered to her, and she expressed interest, to which I replied, "Oh yeah, please." I then conveyed to Elle that I wanted her to understand I wouldn't be sleeping with her over the weekend. I explained that whatever Aaron decided to do, if they reached that point, I would leave. I acknowledged that I would likely long regret what I had just said, all while smiling. As Elle warned me that it wasn't easy to shake her off her tail, she entered the house. I waited a few minutes before following her. When I went upstairs to change clothes, I found no one. However, upon entering our room, I heard the shower running, which abruptly stopped as soon as it registered. No votes. Erin opened the door, wrapped in a towel. She gasped upon seeing me and asked if Elle had already got to me. I assured her that Elle hadn't and explained that I wasn't going with her. I expressed hope that Erin wouldn't go with Mr. G either, reminding her that we had discussed the situation earlier. I inquired about what they had been doing while Elle and I were swimming. Erin informed me that Mr. G showed her around, pointing out the swimming pool, tennis court, and gym downstairs. She emphasized that there was no relationship activity involved. I acknowledged my belief that Mr. G wouldn't engage in such risky behavior, considering they didn't know how long Elle and I would be gone, and I suspected they had been watching us during our swim. Erin concurred, describing Mr. G as a gentleman. However, she expressed concern that sooner or later, he would come for me. I admitted to the likelihood and added that Elle would come for her as well. Erin grinned, saying it wasn't very comforting, but assured that she wouldn't give in, emphasizing that I shouldn't either. We discussed our plans for the evening, with Erin declaring that we had time for love after drinks and snacks at 5. She dropped the towel, and I admitted I was still on edge because of Elle. We engaged privately with genuine zeal, only realizing afterward that the windows were open. Erin remarked that it didn't matter, stating that they were married. Glancing out the window, Elle sat on a sun lounger about 6 meters away. She looked up, smiled, waved her hand, and then reached for her shorts. I distanced myself from the window. Erin noticed my renewed arousal and fixed her gaze on me. Glancing out the window, she remained entranced for a while. A groan emanated from outside. Erin turned to me, exclaiming, "Oh my God, Donnie, forget about yourself. She can have me. I can give up on you. I will not give up." Erin teased that I had to beg Elle to give up, claiming it was the only chance I had. I mentioned that I had already tried begging, but it didn't seem to work. I speculated that Plato had given Ella a task so he could have me. Finding the situation strange, but admitting it kept my interest. I promised Erin that I wouldn't give in to Elle's advances, expressing gratitude for her help. Erin observed that I was still erect, and suggested that we could engage privately every 2 hours to alleviate the situation. We descended to the main room in casual attire, Docker shorts and a collared shirt for me, and Erin in a dress with her hair down and high-heeled sandals. Mr. G was already there, sipping beer. He inquired about our swim with Ella, and I responded positively, praising Ella's swimming talents. Mr. G suggested I call him Plato, appreciating the famous name. He mentioned his father's fondness for reading about Plato. Ella joined us, also wearing a dress and heels. The dress seemed modest, but looked anything but on her. I sensed Erin feeling a bit insecure, understanding it was part of the game. Elle attempting to outshine Erin, who, in turn, would try to assert herself by winning Plato's attention. I moved closer to Erin, putting my arm around her shoulders. Plato informed us about the available beverages and snacks, expressing a preference for pretzels. As he spoke, he ate one. The 4 of us chatted for a while, and then Ella took me to show me around the house, which I found impressive. I asked if Plato used the gym, and Elle confirmed, mentioning his preference for weightlifting. She pointed to the bench with a barbell and described it as heavy. I demonstrated a few swings with the barbell, with Ella watching intently from above. Ella mentioned that Plato only did 3 reps before resting, and as she spoke, she began breathing heavily. I decided to lift the barbell and did 8 more reps. Plato then commented on Ella's strengths, suggesting that her role for the weekend should be to seduce me so Plato could take care of Erin. Ella acknowledged that similar tasks had occurred before, expressing her willingness to finish the job, even if it wasn't usually very pleasant. She playfully asked if I would stop if she started begging. I was genuinely serious in my response, but she perceived it as a joke, stating that she wouldn't stop, but would enjoy seeing me beg. Elle then ascended the stairs, and I waited for my hardness to subside before standing up. The 3 of them huddled together in the living room and conversed. When I entered, they fell silent, and Plato suggested I have something to drink, maybe beer. I glanced at the bar, walked over, extracted a bottle of Corona, and popped it open. The others had wine, and we chatted for a bit. I then asked if they had finished discussing their plot, or if I should leave, prompting an awkward silence. Ellis Lentley observed the others, mainly Aaron, who looked at Plato. Plato then stated that there were no secrets. At that moment, Simon came in and declared that dinner was served, leading us into the dining room, where dishes were arranged on the buffet table. It was a familial serving style. We sat at one end of a large table. They poured water, but I opted for my beer and refrained from water. Breaking the conversation, Plato addressed the tense situation I had created, and we engaged in friendly discussions about politics and baseball. Plato was a Yankees fan. Aaron and I rooted for the Orioles and Nationals. Ellie liked the Pirates, being from Jonestown. Simon served dessert, tiramisu. I skipped mine. Plato seemed to notice. Aaron insisted that Plato not skip dessert, encouraging him to eat. Plato commented on keeping his waist in check and mentioned Aaron having no fat in her body, claiming to have observed her while swimming and noting her preference for beer over water. In response to Aaron expressing a lack of trust, Plato dismissed the idea of being medicated with something forbidden, considering it crazy. He encouraged me to eat and drink while pushing a glass of water and tiramisu towards me. I smiled and offered the same to Plato. However, he sat with a stony face and instructed Simon to clear the table. Simon noticed the change in the water and dessert arrangement, picked up my untouched glass of water and tiramisu, and carried them away. Elle suggested moving to the courtyard for music and dancing. Aaron and Plato remained silent. I stood up and extended my hand to Elle, leading her to the patio. Once there, she remarked on my apparent suspicion of Plato slipping something into the food and water. I acknowledged the possibility, but noted that Plato hadn't taken either himself and had them removed by Simon. The others joined us, and soft music started playing. I approached Aaron, took her by the elbow, and led her away from Plato into the open area. We danced, and although Aaron was initially shy, she eventually relaxed. Pressing herself close to me, she whispered, "I love you, Donnie, always. I love you too, Aaron." We continued dancing. The music concluded, and we joined Plato and Elle at a table. Soon, the music resumed, and Elle rose, offering her hand to me. She led me to the dance floor. We danced. Elle might have been the world's most captivating distraction, with her sweet, subtle fragrance and the contours of her body. She entranced me, eliciting immediate delight, as she always did. Observing Plato's hands on Aaron's backside, I noted that she didn't push them away. Breaking away from Elle, I walked the short distance to Aaron and Plato, standing there and observing them. Aaron noticed and tried to move away from Plato, who persisted in keeping his hands on her. She gently pushed him on the chest, expressing a desire to avoid problems. Plato released her, but took her hand, guiding her back to the table. Elle returned after me, and we sat down, with her sitting very close to me. Aaron held Plato's hand as they sat side by side. Plato expressed disappointment in me, claiming that Elle was a fantastic lover and could provide me with one of the most powerful and delightful experiences of my life. He accused me of denying her this opportunity. I asserted that I had a wife and wouldn't entertain the idea of a trade, bringing us back to the initial discussion. Turning to Aaron, I stated that it was either him or me, with no intermediary options. She withdrew her hand from his, but looked at me and suggested that it was only for the weekend, and on Monday, everything would be back to normal. She asked if I couldn't have some fun with Ella for the time being. Scrutinizing her, I questioned if she was serious, and if I should take it as a yes or no, even if it meant it would be over between us. I firmly stated my refusal with a simple no. Despite not understanding why it should imply anything, I made it clear that I wouldn't entertain the idea. I extended my hand to her, and she took it. Pulling her towards me, I gave her the hottest kiss I could muster, running my hands up and down her body. Afterward, I pulled away, tears welling up in my eyes. I exhaled the words that nearly crushed me, stating, "The mere thought that you would agree to be with this guy means it's all over between us. It's done." I turned and headed for the stairs. She cried out, "No, Donnie, no!" I reached the top of the stairs, grabbed my previously packed bag, and left through the back fire escape. I made the call and ran into the darkness, sobbing. While running, I still heard screams. About 20 minutes later, I heard a plane. It landed near the southern dock, and my friend Todd Jacobs swam up to me. Approaching him with Plato and Simon emerging behind me, Plato exclaimed that there was no escape and suggested I stay to calm my wife down. Charging at me, I reached the pier. Plato, uncontrollable and unfit for a fight, splashed around in the water, shouting about firing me. Boarding the plane with Todd at the controls, we flew to a small lake near Dulles. A car was waiting for me there, and I paid Todd for the service. Heading home to Alexandria, the road was dark and desolate. Our house, too, was dimly lit. Upon entering, I surveyed the surroundings. Photos of us in happier times, pictures of our relatives. Shocked, I sat in a chair, gazing into space, and that's how I drifted off to sleep. At 8 in the morning, a car's sound outside woke me up. I peered out and saw Erin stepping out of a rental car. She carried her bag to the door, unlocked it, and went inside. I stood and observed her, and she stood motionless, gazing at me. She looked awful, probably no better than me. She expressed in her entire life she had never messed up like that and vowed never to do it again, not wanting to lose me. I shrugged in response. I confronted Erin, asking her what she thought would happen when she decided to let Plato use her. I questioned if she thought I wouldn't notice because of Elle. She admitted to being stupid and not anticipating the consequences. I inquired if Erin and Plato had set everything up, and she looked down, confessing that Plato suggested there might be a substitution when they got there. She foresaw it in advance, thinking she would say no, but I surprised her by agreeing, with the condition that I go with Elle. She mentioned how much I seemed to desire Elle, and that the whole experience was intended as a sideshow to rekindle our marriage. I smiled in response. I questioned Erin about why she thought Plato would be better than me. She explained that he excited her, being older and stronger, and suggested that he knew what to do to win her over. She clarified that she never thought he would be better than me, just different. Concerned about the future, I asked how I could be sure this wouldn't happen again, considering there are many guys like Plato in the world, and he's still around. Erin insisted that she didn't mean to cheat and believed everything was right in front of me. She thought I would agree now, since I had turned down Elle. Expressing my disappointment, I remarked that she wasn't the woman I met and married, emphasizing that the woman I knew wouldn't succumb to the advances of another guy. Erin pleaded to see what happens next and suggested we continue enjoying great lovemaking while acknowledging that we both missed it. She stood up and removed all her clothes, prompting me to think about turning away but ultimately not doing so. She led me upstairs. The only constant in our relationship, always present and likely to remain, is our complete coital compatibility. I let her go home, and 10 years later, I picked up our kids from the school bus, Jessica, who is 8, and Robert, who is 6. Helen, who is 3, and doesn't attend school yet. As a stay-at-home writer, I had help and the opportunity to write. It took over a year before I trusted Erin enough to let her stop taking the pills, and when she did, our lovemaking life flourished. The idea of her getting pregnant excited us greatly. I closed my contract with the previous publisher, and Sally and I moved on to something else. The first book I wrote was about adventures on an island, closely mirroring reality. It sold a considerable number of copies, securing a movie deal that included my 3 previous books. Plato couldn't complain about half-truths in the new book, where he was cast as Socrates and met a fitting fate. Erin now owns 2 stores that generate some income, while I earn substantially. Before fully accepting her back, Erin signed a postnuptial agreement, ensuring fidelity from both of us. With the school year underway, as I drove the 2 older kids home, a small red sports car arrived at our entrance. A remarkable pair of legs emerged, followed by the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen. The children excitedly ran up to her shouting, "Aunt Helen!" She hugged them and fussed around, while young Helen welcomed her at the door. I poured her favorite drink, seltzer, and informed her that Erin would arrive soon. I mentioned preparing a high-calorie salad, concluding with, "But that's a completely different story." I'm Donald, aged 56, sharing my life for the first time. I'm married to Lauren, aged 45, and we have a 13-year-old daughter. This recount is from a few months ago. My wife, our daughter, and I were in Istanbul with a large group of 3 families, totaling around 16 people. As our trip concluded, we gathered at Istanbul Airport for our collective return to Chicago. With an 11-hour flight ahead, we conducted a group accounting session. Unexpectedly, Our flight faced a 6-hour delay. Utilizing the time, we all headed to the lounge, finding it surprisingly empty. We were the sole occupants, engaging in lively conversations, sharing smiles, and reliving tales of Turkey and its delectable cuisine. Taking a brief smoke break, I returned after 15 minutes, walking towards my wife. Spotting a slender figure near her, my heart raced, not due to nicotine, but an intense surge of emotions. The closer I got, the more my heart raced, transporting me back 2 decades to a moment of holding hands in a church, saying, "I do," and embarking on a shared life. Suddenly, I snapped back to the lounge, informing my wife of my need for fresh air before walking out without acknowledging the woman talking to her. Outside, memories flooded back, bringing me to moments with Maria in Columbus, Georgia, by the Chattahoochee River. Closing my eyes, I revisited our love story from college to marriage. Maria, my life, has been the object of my affection since our college days. We married, moved in together, and embarked on a promising married life. My journalism career and her role as a financial expert led to frequent travels, yet we maintained our connection. Maria's sparkling eyes brightened my days, and when at home, our time was filled with love and delicious meals she prepared. The initial 2 years of marriage were seamless, with no signs of trouble in paradise. We postponed having children to establish ourselves professionally. Our only challenge was the limited time we could spend together due to our demanding jobs. Travel became a constant, even for Maria. The sole point of contention was my mother, living alone and desiring frequent visits. My wife harbored a dislike for her, and although I never probed the reasons, I endeavored to keep them apart, maintaining a delicate balance between them. In January, my mother became ill, and I informed my wife that I would care for her. She wasn't pleased, since I had just returned from covering a story in Iraq. We argued because she wanted me to hire help for my mother instead of going myself. I explained that my mother is old, and this might be the last time I see her alive. Maria was unhappy, but I ignored it. 3 days later, my mother died in my arms, leaving me devastated. After her burial, I returned home, and Maria once again complained about my mother. I was shocked and couldn't understand her point. She caused so much trouble, insisting that the deceased person should have been in the hospital from the start. I remained silent, trying to comprehend it all. "Why is Maria criticizing a deceased person?" I retorted, but she shut me down, saying the person won't respond, so I should zip it. That led to a week of silence between us. To break the ice, I took her out for dinner, and that night, we shared a closeness moment. Things seemed better, but I had to go to Afghanistan to cover the historic Silk Road. In my absence, Maria earned promotions and a higher salary. When I returned 2 weeks later, everything had changed. Coming home, Maria greeted me warmly, but during dinner, she seemed tense. She said we needed changes in our lives. "What changes do you want?" I asked. She expressed the challenges of my frequent and prolonged absences, longing for my touch. Maria gave me 2 options: find a job near her, or find her a job to travel with me. Torn, but relieved by her honesty, I agreed to find another job, closing the topic. The next morning, I resigned and got a local job at the TV channel, even though it paid less. When I told Maria about the 30% reduction in my salary, she was angry. I explained the trade-off for a stationary job, but she resisted, upset about the decreased contribution and its impact on her lifestyle. It was a tough situation, but I was committed to making it work. We continued like that, and over the next 3 months, things deteriorated. We talked less, and nights lacked lovemaking. Her demeanor shifted from a loving wife to a nagging presence. She found faults in everything, and not a single day passed without going to bed angry. It got so bad that one night she asked me to stop breathing as my breath disturbed her sleep. A few days later, my phone went missing, prompting me to use my wife's phone to call mine. Surprisingly, her phone was locked, which was unusual since I never had a lock on mine, and she never did either, as far as I knew. This raised suspicions about why her phone had a lock. Was she hiding something? On a Thursday night, she returned from a late-night party with her office friends, appearing disheveled in a black dress with no lipstick. When I asked what happened, she explained she danced too much and was tired. Helping her to the bedroom, I noticed a bruise on her left thigh, and she wasn't wearing panties, which was out of character for her. Unable to sleep that night, I became determined to uncover the truth. As a journalist, My instinct was to investigate. Although I knew many people who could assist, I preferred handling it on my own. 3 weeks later, I found myself outside Motel 6 on Victory Drive at 2:30 p.m., having tracked Maria's car there. Approaching room 12, I unlocked the door and discovered a monitor displaying my wife in a compromising position with her blonde lover, Steve Bowman, an old college foe who had always admired Maria. My tears had ceased, leaving me emotionally numb. The pain in my heart was overwhelming after 3 weeks of relentless investigation. Breaking the door and acting impulsively crossed my mind, but I had promised the motel manager no violence, a condition for his assistance in setting up recording devices in the room. Despite the manager's restriction, violence remained an option outside the motel. I left the motel with a smile, got into my car, and parked behind Steve's Mustang. Armed with an ice pick, I punctured all 4 tires, patiently waiting for what would unfold next. After an hour, Steve emerged, holding Maria by her exposed waist, an image I captured on camera. I returned my camera to its place and stepped out of my truck, approaching them directly. Maria remained silent, appearing as if she had seen a ghost, while Steve wore a sinister grin, reveling in taking another man's wife. Keeping his grip on her waist, I observed Maria's feeble attempt to free herself. Upon noticing me, she greeted and questioned my unexpected presence. I stared back, not uttering a word. In an effort to explain, she insisted that she could clarify, emphasizing that it wasn't what I might be thinking. In response to her explanation, my retort came with my gaze fixed on Steve's hand on her waist, stating that I was not thinking, just observing. With a smile, I made a remark, suggesting that Steve might have taken away my wife. Maria denied any wrongdoing, explaining that their interaction was part of a meeting they had at that location. My response was cynical, pointing out that the meeting seemed to involve unconventional activities. I asked if Steve had satisfied her, prompting a gasp from Maria as she recalled her recent words. A warning followed, stating that all her actions were on video and would be sent to her office, reaching friends, family, Linda, and her dad. Steve interjected, shouting a plea to leave Linda out of the situation. Dismissing his request, I added that Linda had every right to be involved since her husband was involved with my wife, creating a lot of unfinished business. Maintaining a smile, I continued, mentioning that Linda had already witnessed their actions and was eagerly awaiting the video copy to file for divorce. I suggested that, in their situation, preparing to say goodbye to their beloved Mustang might be wise, as it would be sold to settle the lawsuit. Furious, Steve lunged at me, a big mistake considering my years of travel to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. I had been among warriors and fighters, learning a few tricks along the way. Blocking his right hand, ducking forward, I landed a left on his chin, causing him to drop like a bag of potatoes. He struggled to get up, wobbling towards me, only to receive an uppercut that left him unconscious. Maria stood there horrified, and I instructed her to get in the truck. We didn't go home. Instead, we headed straight to my lawyer. Ignoring Maria's inquiries, I gestured for her silence. In the lawyer's office, we were directed to the large conference room and took seats on opposite sides of the table. The atmosphere was tense until Ron Freeman, my lawyer, entered and handed an envelope to Maria. He explained the terms, stating that the divorce had been filed based on irreconcilable differences. There was no shared property, and the legal transfer of his mother's house hadn't occurred, so she couldn't claim it. He informed her that she would receive half the money from the joint account, which she could withdraw since she earned more. There was no alimony. Ron concluded the discussion and left the room. Maria clutched the envelope and directed her gaze at me. Breaking the silence, I warned her that if she contested the divorce, I'd alter the grounds to infidelity, ensuring widespread exposure of her infidelity on all social media platforms. I threatened to send the evidence to her office, leading to termination, and vowed to follow her if she fled to another city, making her life a perpetual fear of tarnished reputation. After she nodded in understanding, I stood up and left. Maria, however, spoke up, questioning if I wanted to know why she acted as she did. She explained that I desired a lifestyle she couldn't provide, seeking luxury without understanding the sacrifices. According to her, the blonde lover fulfilled those desires temporarily, but he was already married and merely seeking cheap entertainment. Maria questioned how long such happiness would last, anticipating a cycle of seeking new lovers. She concluded by pointing out my present situation with only an envelope in hand. Her parting words wished me a nice day. Months later, I encountered her in court during the divorce proceedings. We never exchanged words, only receiving the court's orders granting the divorce. Steve, her lover, never filed a complaint against me, as cameras in the parking lot would have shown him as the aggressor. I sent Linda the videos and evidence of Steve's infidelity, leading to their divorce, and rumors of Steve facing consequences from Linda's brothers. Linda's father, connected and vengeful, wanted to punish Maria, but Linda intervened. I changed jobs and eventually returned to my old position in a different city. Life moved forward, and at Istanbul Airport, I found myself a chief journalist with ample wealth, a faithful wife, and a wonderful daughter. Back in the airport lounge, my wife continued conversing with Maria for hours. Staying away, I observed their interaction, concerned about Maria's intentions. Later, I confirmed our departure time with airport officials. Boarding the flight after a challenging wait, I sat beside my wife, who displayed a different smile. Curious, I inquired about her discussion with Maria. She revealed she was expressing gratitude to Maria for her mistakes, which led her to find me. Surprised, I asked if Maria had disclosed this information. My wife clarified that Maria never mentioned me, but shared court orders and investigative materials found in the attic. When I asked about their conversation, my wife downplayed it, stating she listened to Maria's regrets about missing her ex-husband and her desire for a life like mine. I smiled, closed my eyes, and settled back into my chair.
Story 4. James Broderick pulled into his driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel under his tires marking the end of another long workday. At 45, he'd built the life he'd always wanted: project manager at a top construction firm, a beautiful home in Chapel Hill's most desirable neighborhood, and a family he trusted completely. As he stepped out of his car, the warm evening air carried the scent of blooming dogwoods. James paused, taking in the sight of his two-story colonial. Its pristine white siding and manicured lawn were testaments to his success, reminders of how far he'd come through sheer determination. Inside, he expected to find April, his wife of 20 years, probably chatting on the phone with one of her marketing clients. Their daughter Delilah would be packing for college, no doubt excited about the adventure ahead. James allowed himself a small smile. He'd never needed anyone else to solve his problems or shape his destiny. Everything he had, he'd earned through hard work and unwavering discipline. As he approached the side door, voices drifted from the kitchen window. James recognized April's laugh, light and carefree. He was about to announce his presence when something in Delilah's tone made him pause. "Mom, how did you like my boyfriend Dark Dick last night?" There was a teasing lilt to Delilah's words that fell off. James froze, his hand inches from the doorknob. April's response came, dripping with a sultry satisfaction he'd never heard before. "Oh, honey, it was incredible. I can't wait for more." The world tilted beneath James's feet. His vision narrowed, focusing on his white-knuckled grip on the doorframe. Every muscle in his body tensed, coiled to spring into action. But James didn't move. He didn't burst through the door demanding answers. Instead, he took one silent step back, then another. His mind raced, replaying every moment of the past few months. April's increased time on her phone, the hushed conversations that stopped when he entered a room, the way Delilah had been avoiding his eyes. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. James got back into his car, his movements mechanical. He drove, barely registering the familiar streets until he found himself parked in front of the neighborhood park. The laughter of children on the playground felt like a mockery of his shattered world. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "No," he muttered, the name tasting like poison on his tongue. James had always prided himself on his self-control, but now he felt it slipping. The urge to confront April, to demand answers from Delilah, burned through him like wildfire. But James Broderick wasn't a man who acted on impulse. He closed his eyes, forcing slow, deep breaths until the initial wave of rage subsided. When he opened them again, his gaze was cold and focused. "You want to play games?" he whispered to the empty car. "Fine, let's play." The drive home was a blur. James entered through the front door this time, his face a mask of normalcy as he called out, "I'm home." April appeared from the kitchen, a dish towel in her hands. "Hey, honey, you're later than usual. Everything okay at work?" James studied her face, searching for a hint of guilt, a flicker of unease. There was nothing. She met his eyes with the same warm smile she'd given him for 2 decades. "Just wrapping up some paperwork," he lied smoothly. "Where's Delilah?" "Upstairs, I think. Probably lost in her phone again." April rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "That girl and her social media, I swear." James nodded, fighting to keep his tone casual. "I'm going to grab a shower. Long day." "Dinner will be ready in about half an hour," April called after him as he climbed the stairs. In the safety of the master bathroom, James leaned heavily against the closed door. The sound of running water masked the ragged breaths that tore from his chest. He caught sight of himself in the mirror. A stranger stared back, eyes burning with a cold fury he'd never seen before. James stripped off his work clothes, letting the hot water pound against his skin. As steam filled the small space, he began to plan. Confrontation now would be pointless. April would lie, twist the situation, and Delilah, the betrayal from his own daughter, cut deeper than he could have imagined. No, this required careful strategy. James had built his career on meticulous planning and flawless execution. Now, he would apply those same skills to dismantling the lives of those who had betrayed him. Dinner that night was an exercise in restraint. James watched April and Delilah, noting every shared glance, every seemingly innocent comment. To an outsider, it would have appeared a normal family meal. But beneath the surface, James's mind whirred with calculations and possibilities. "So, Delilah," he said, keeping his tone light, "how are the college preparations coming along?" Delilah looked up from her plate, a flicker of something guilt crossing her face before she smiled. "Pretty good, Dad. Just finalizing my packing list." "And how's Noah doing?" The name slipped out before James could stop himself. He saw April's forked paws halfway to her mouth. "No." Delilah's voice hitched slightly. "Oh, he's fine, I guess. Why do you ask?" James shrugged, taking a slow sip of water. "Just curious. You mentioned him the other day, right? Your boyfriend's brother?" "Yeah, that's right." Delilah glanced at her mother, then back to her plate. "He's cool." The conversation moved on, but James had seen enough. The shared look between mother and daughter, the slight tremor in Delilah's hand as she reached for her glass, had all confirmed what he already knew. Later that night, after April had fallen asleep, James slipped out of bed. He made his way to the garage, closing the door behind him with a soft click. This space had always been his sanctuary, a place to think and plan. Now, it would become his war room. James settled into his worn leather chair, opening his laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, casting harsh shadows across his features. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he began his research. Divorce laws, financial regulations, property division statutes. Hours passed as James delved deeper. He created spreadsheets detailing their assets, mapped out potential scenarios, and drafted preliminary plans. By the time the first hints of dawn crept through the garage windows, James had the bones of a strategy. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. The anger that had threatened to consume him earlier had crystallized into something colder, more focused. April and Delilah had no idea what was coming. They thought they held all the cards, that their little secret was safe. James allowed himself a small, grim smile. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. As he stood to return to the house, James caught sight of a family photo pinned to the bulletin board. It showed the three of them, James, April, and Delilah, laughing on a beach vacation years ago. Without hesitation, he unpinned it and dropped it into the trash. The man in that photo, the one who believed in trust and family above all else, was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone who would stop at nothing to reclaim control of his life and extract the vengeance he deserved. James Broderick stepped back into his house, ready to begin the performance of a lifetime. Let April and Delilah think everything was normal. Let them believe their secret was safe. The game had only just begun. The next morning, James Broderick woke before his alarm. He lay still, listening to April's steady breathing beside him. For a moment, the familiar rhythm almost lulled him back to their old life. Then reality crashed over him, and his jaw clenched. He slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb her. In the kitchen, he started the coffee maker, its quiet gurgle filling the silence. As he waited, James stared out the window, his reflection ghostly in the pre-dawn darkness. "You're up early," April's voice startled him. She padded into the kitchen, wrapping her robe tightly around herself. James turned, his face a mask of normalcy. "Big day at work. Thought I'd get a head start." April smiled, reaching for a mug. "Always the overachiever. That's what I love about you." The word love hung in the air between them. James felt his fingers twitch, wanting to curl into fists. Instead, he forced a smile. "What are your plans for the day?" "Oh, the usual. Some client calls, maybe lunch with Susan." April sipped her coffee, not quite meeting his eyes. "Oh, and I need to run by the mall later. Pick up a few things for Delilah before she leaves for college." James nodded, noting the slight hesitation in her voice. "Sounds good. Don't work too hard." As he left for work, James's mind raced. The mall, a perfect opportunity. He pulled out his phone, making a quick call. "Dave, it's James. Remember that favor you owe me? I need it now." At the office, James went through the motions of his day. He attended meetings, approved budgets, and delegated tasks. To anyone watching, he was the same efficient, no-nonsense project manager he'd always been. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. During his lunch break, James drove to an electronics store across town. He emerged with a small bag, his expression unreadable. Back home that evening, James found the house empty. A note on the fridge caught his eye. "Girls' night with Susan. Don't wait up. Love, April." James crumpled the note, tossing it in the trash. "Perfect," he muttered. He moved through the house with purpose, setting up hidden cameras in strategic locations. The living room, the kitchen, April's home office. As he worked, James's phone buzzed with a text from Dave. "Package delivered." "Good luck, man." In the master bedroom, James hesitated before placing a final camera. This had been their sanctuary, a place of trust and intimacy. Now, it would become the stage for April's undoing. Just as he finished, he heard the front door open. Delilah's voice drifted up the stairs. "Dad? You home?" James quickly composed himself, stepping out into the hallway. "Up here, sweetheart." Delilah appeared at the top of the stairs, a shopping bag in hand. "Hey, Dad. How was work?" "Same old." James shrugged. He nodded towards a bag. "Do some shopping?" A flicker of unease crossed Delilah's face. "Oh yeah, just some stuff for college." James leaned against the wall, his tone casual. I was thinking, we should have a family dinner before you leave. Maybe invite that boyfriend of yours. What's his name again?" "Tyler," Delilah said quickly. Too quickly. Yeah, that sounds nice. I'll ask him." "Great," James smiled. "And hey, why not invite his brother too?" "No, right? The more, the merrier." Delilah's eyes widened slightly. "No, I don't know if he'd be interested in a family dinner." James waved his hand dismissively. "Nonsense. I insist. It'll be fun." As Delilah retreated to her room, James allowed himself a small, grim smile. The pieces were falling into place. Over the next few days, James became a ghost in his own home. He moved silently, always watching, always listening. The cameras fed a constant stream of information to his laptop, hidden away in the garage. One evening, as April chatted on the phone in the kitchen, James eavesdropped from the living room. I know. April laughed into the receiver. "But you should have seen his face when I suggested it." He had no idea. James's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. April continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, I've got to go. James will be home soon. But I'll see you tomorrow, right? Same place." As she hung up, James forced his features into a neutral expression. He waited a moment, then walked into the kitchen. "Hey, honey, who was that?" April jumped slightly, turning to face him. "Oh, just Susan. Girl talk, James nodded, reaching past her to grab a glass. "How is Susan these days?" She's good, April said a little too quickly. Busy with work, as usual. James murmured, filling his glass with water. He took a long sip, watching April over the rim. You know, I was thinking, your birthday's coming up soon. We should do something special. April's eyebrows rose in surprise. Really? You remembered? James chuckled, the sound hollow to his own ears. Of course. How about a party? We could invite all your friends. Susan, of course. Maybe some of Delilah's friends, too. That sounds lovely, April stammered. You don't have to go to all that trouble, though. James set down his glass, moving closer to April. He placed his hands on her shoulders, feeling her tense slightly under his touch. Nonsense. You deserve it. Let me take care of everything. As he pulled her into a hug, James's eyes were cold and focused over her shoulder. The party would be perfect, every detail meticulously planned, and it would be the beginning of the end for April's carefully constructed lie. The next day, James left work early, heading to a high-end bakery across town. The bell chimed softly as he entered, and a young woman behind the counter looked up with a smile. Welcome to Sweet Creations. How can I help you today? James approached the counter, his expression serious. I need to order a special cake. For my wife's birthday. The woman nodded enthusiastically. Of course. We have a wide variety of flavors and designs. Did you have something specific in mind? Lavender buttercream, James said firmly, with intricate floral designs. It needs to be perfect. As the woman jotted down notes, James leaned in closer. There's one more thing. I need a special addition to the cake. A hidden compartment, if you will. The woman's pen paused, her eyebrows furrowing in confusion. I'm sorry, sir. A hidden compartment? James pulled out a thick envelope from his jacket. Yes, this needs to be concealed inside the cake. It's a surprise for my wife. Sir, I'm not sure we can. James cut her off, placing a stack of bills on the counter. I'm sure you can figure something out. Consider this a generous tip for your discretion. The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. I understand. When do you need this ready? Next Saturday, James replied, his tone brooking no argument. I'll pick it up myself. As he left the bakery, James felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. The cake would be the centerpiece of his plan, the vehicle for April's ultimate humiliation. Back at home, James retreated to the garage once more. He opened his laptop, reviewing the footage from the hidden cameras. Hours of mundane activity scrolled by until suddenly, he sat up straight. On the screen, April paced in the bedroom, phone pressed to her ear. No, we need to be more careful. James has been acting, different lately. James leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. No, of course he doesn't suspect anything, April continued. But this birthday party idea, it's not like him. I can't help feeling like something's off. She paused, listening. Then, I know. You're right. I'm probably just being paranoid. Listen, I got to go. Delilah will be home soon. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Love you too. The video ended, and James sat back, a mixture of rage and vindication coursing through him. He had all the proof he needed now. Opening a new document, he began to type furiously, outlining his demands for the divorce. As the days ticked by, James's plan took shape. He moved money into separate accounts, consulted with financial advisors, and set up trust funds for their younger son, Ethan. Every night, while April slept peacefully beside him, James reviewed his strategy, ensuring no detail was overlooked. The morning of April's birthday dawned bright and clear. James woke early, his stomach churning with anticipation. He turned to April, who was still asleep, and allowed himself one moment of weakness. He reached out, his hand hovering over her cheek, remembering all the years they'd shared. Then he pulled back, his resolve hardening once more. Happy birthday, honey, he said loudly, startling April awake. She blinked up at him, a slow smile spreading across her face. Thank you, James. I can't believe you remembered. James forced a chuckle. How could I forget? It's going to be a day to remember, trust me. As April showered, James headed downstairs to start the preparations. Delilah emerged from her room, looking groggy. Morning, Dad, she yawned. Need any help setting up? James turned to her, his expression unreadable. Actually, yes. Could you pick up the cake for me? I've got a few last-minute errands to run. Delilah nodded, reaching for her car keys. Sure thing. Where from? Sweet Creations, James replied. It's already paid for. Just tell them it's for the Broderick party. As Delilah left, James allowed himself a small, grim smile. Everything was falling into place. The hours ticked by, and guests began to arrive. James played the perfect host, greeting everyone with a smile and a firm handshake. April flitted from group to group, laughing and chatting, completely oblivious to the storm about to break. Finally, the moment arrived. The lights dimmed, and James carefully carried the cake into the room. Candles flickered atop the lavender frosting, casting dancing shadows across April's beaming face. Make a wish, honey, James said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. April closed her eyes, then leaned forward to blow out the candles. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Time to cut the cake, someone called out. James handed April the knife, his fingers brushing against hers. For a moment, their eyes met, and James saw a flicker of the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Then he stepped back, watching as she pressed the blade into the soft frosting. The knife hit something solid. April frowned, wiggling the blade. What in the world? She reached in, pulling out the manila envelope. The room fell silent as April turned it over in her hands, confusion etched across her face. James, she looked up at him. What is this? His voice was cold, cutting through the tension in the room. Why don't you open it and find out? With trembling fingers, April tore open the envelope. As she read the contents, all color drained from her face. She looked up at James, her eyes wide with shock and fear. James, I can explain, but James cut her off, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. No need, April. I think the pictures and text messages explain everything quite clearly. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Delilah pushed forward, her face a mask of horror. Dad, what's going on? James turned to her, his expression hardening. Why don't you tell them, Delilah? Tell everyone how you introduced your mother to Noah, how you helped her betray me. Delilah stumbled back, tears welling in her eyes. Dad, please, but James was beyond hearing. He addressed the stunned crowd, his voice steady and cold. I'm sorry you all had to witness this, but I thought it was important that the truth come out. My wife and daughter have been lying to me, to all of us, for months. April reached for him, her voice breaking. James, please. We can talk about this. He stepped back, out of her reach. There's nothing left to talk about, April. The papers are all there. I suggest you read them carefully. As James turned to leave, the room erupted into chaos. Voices rose in shock and disbelief. But James didn't look back. He walked out of the house, into the cool evening air, leaving behind the shattered remains of his old life. In his car, James sat for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The anger that had fueled him for weeks began to ebb, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. But as he started the engine, a new resolve settled over him. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning on his terms. James Broderick drove away from the house, from the life he'd built and lost. But he wasn't defeated. He was reborn, stronger and colder than ever before. And he was ready to face whatever came next, alone and unafraid. The morning after April's disastrous birthday party, James sat in his lawyer's office, his face a mask of calm determination. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished oak desk. Mr. Broderick, the lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, leaned forward. I've reviewed the evidence you've provided. It's extensive. James nodded, his voice steady. I want to move quickly. How soon can we file? The lawyer tapped her pen against a thick folder. We can submit the paperwork today. Given the circumstances, I believe we have a strong case for an expedited process. Good, James said, his jaw set. And the custody arrangements for Ethan? Based on the evidence of your wife's infidelity and your daughter's involvement, I'm confident we can secure full custody for you. James stood, extending his hand. Then let's proceed. I want this done as swiftly and cleanly as possible. As he left the office, James's phone buzzed incessantly. Missed calls and text messages from April, Delilah, and various friends flooded his screen. He ignored them all, sliding the phone back into his pocket. Back at the house, James found April waiting for him in the kitchen. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "James," she began, her voice quavering. "Please, can we talk about this?" He moved past her, reaching for a glass in the cupboard. "There's nothing to talk about, April. You made your choices." April grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. "It was a mistake. I never meant for any of this to happen. Please, James, 20 years of marriage has to count for something." James looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. His voice was cold, devoid of emotion. "It counted for something, right up until you decided to throw it all away for a fling with a younger man." "It wasn't just a fling," April cried, then immediately clamped her hand over her mouth, realizing her mistake. James's laugh was bitter. "Well, thank you for your honesty. At least now, at the end, you can manage that much." He shook off her grip, moving towards the stairs. April followed, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "James, please. Think about Ethan. He needs both his parents. We can work through this, go to counseling." James whirled around, his eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "Don't you dare use our son as a bargaining chip. Ethan will be just fine with me. As for counseling, save it for yourself and Delilah. You two seem to have a lot to work out." As if on cue, the front door opened, and Delilah stepped in. She froze at the sight of her parents on the stairs, the tension palpable in the air. "Dad," she started, her voice small. "Can we please talk?" James descended the stairs, brushing past his daughter without a glance. "I think you and your mother have said quite enough already." Delilah grabbed his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, please. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought Mom seemed unhappy," and when Noah showed interest, James jerked his hand away as if burned. He turned to face Delilah, his voice low and dangerous. "You thought your mother seemed unhappy, so you decided to play matchmaker? With your boyfriend's brother? Do you have any idea how twisted that is?" Delilah flinched at his words, shrinking back. April moved to stand beside her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "James," April pleaded, "don't take this out on Delilah. She's just a child, she's 18, James cut in. Old enough to know right from wrong. Old enough to understand the consequences of her actions." He looked between them, these two women who had been the center of his world for so long. Now, all he felt was a cold, hollow emptiness. "I've filed for divorce," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "April, you'll be hearing from my lawyer. Delilah, I suggest you focus on your college preparations. This house will be sold as part of the settlement." April gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Sold? But James, this is our home." "Not anymore," he replied, moving towards the door. "I'll be staying at a hotel until the proceedings are finalized. I suggest you both start packing." As he stepped outside, Delilah's voice called out, cracking with emotion. "Dad, please don't go. I love you." James paused, his hand on the doorknob. For a moment, the weight of everything, the betrayal, the anger, the shattered trust, threatened to overwhelm him. But he steeled himself, squaring his shoulders. Without turning back, he spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the open door. "Love, Delilah, is about respect, loyalty, and trust. Remember that the next time you decide to meddle in someone else's life." The door closed behind him with a final, resounding click. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal meetings, property assessments, and tense encounters. James threw himself into his work, staying late at the office to avoid the empty hotel room that served as a stark reminder of all he'd lost. One evening, as he pored over blueprints for a new project, a knock at his office door jolted him from his concentration. "Come in," he called, not looking up from his desk. The door opened, and a familiar voice made him freeze. "James, do you have a minute?" He looked up to find Noah standing in the doorway, his expression a mixture of apprehension and determination. James leaned back in his chair, his face impassive. I'm surprised you had the nerve to show up here, James said, his tone icy. What do you want? Noah stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. I came to apologize. What happened? It was wrong. I know that. James's laugh was sharp and humorless. An apology? That's rich. Tell me, Noah, did April send you here to plead her case? No. Noah shook his head emphatically. She doesn't know I'm here. I needed to face you man to man. What I did was unforgivable. On that, we agree, James said, standing slowly. He moved around the desk, his gaze never leaving Noah's face. So, now that you've eased your conscience, what exactly did you hope to accomplish here? Noah swallowed hard, visibly wilting under James's cold stare. I don't know. I guess I hope that maybe someday you could find it in yourself to forgive. Forgive? James cut him off, his voice dangerously low. Let me be very clear, Noah. There will be no forgiveness. Not for you. Not for April. Not for Delilah. You all made your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences. He moved closer, towering over the younger man. Now, I suggest you leave. If I ever see you near my son or my property again, you'll be dealing with more than just my lawyers. Understood? Noah nodded frantically, backing towards the door. I understand. I'm sorry, truly. I'll go now. As the door closed behind Noah, James let out a long, shaky breath. He returned to his desk, sinking into his chair. The encounter had left him drained, but it also solidified his resolve. There was no going back, no room for second chances or forgiveness. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly, thanks to the overwhelming evidence James had gathered. In the end, he was awarded full custody of Ethan, the house, and the majority of their assets. April, her reputation in tatters, was left with little more than her personal belongings and a small settlement. On the day the divorce was finalized, James stood in the courtroom, watching as April signed the papers with a trembling hand. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of the woman he'd once loved. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the harsh reality of their new situation. It's done, the judge announced, her gavel striking with a finality that echoed through the room. Mr. and Mrs. Broderick, you are now legally divorced. As they left the courtroom, April reached out, catching James's sleeve. James, please. Can we at least talk about visitation for Ethan? He's going to need his mother. James turned to her, his expression unreadable. Ethan needs stability and honesty in his life. Two things you've proven incapable of providing. My lawyer will be in touch about supervised visitation schedules. He walked away, leaving April standing alone in the bustling hallway. Outside the courthouse, James found Delilah waiting by his car. She looked small and lost, a far cry from the confident young woman she'd been just months ago. Dad, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you probably don't want to see me, but I couldn't. I needed to be here. James regarded her silently for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured, controlled. Delilah, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. She nodded, eyes wide and brimming with unshed tears. You're my daughter, and biologically, that will never change. But from this moment on, you are no longer a part of my life. The trust between us is irreparably broken. I've set up a fund for your college tuition. Consider it the last act of a father who once believed in you. Delilah's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Dad, please. I know I messed up, but I love you. You're my father. James shook his head, his resolve unwavering. Love isn't just a word, Delilah. It's actions, it's loyalty, it's respect. You chose to actively participate in destroying our family. Those aren't the actions of someone who truly loves their father. He opened his car door, pausing before getting in. I hope you learn from this, Delilah. I hope you grow and become a better person. But that journey is one you'll have to make without me. As he drove away, Delilah's sobs faded into the distance. James felt a twinge in his chest, not regret, but the final severing of a bond he'd once thought unbreakable. In the weeks that followed, James threw himself into creating a new life. He sold the family home, unable to bear the memories that lurked in every corner. With Ethan by his side, he moved into a sleek, modern apartment in the heart of the city. One evening, as James stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his new home, Ethan's small voice broke the silence. "Dad, are you okay?" James turned, looking down at his son. Ethan's eyes, so like his own, were filled with a wisdom beyond his years. James knelt down, placing his hands on Ethan's shoulders. "I'm okay, buddy. It's been a tough time, but we're going to be just fine. You and me, we're a team now. Understand?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "I understand, Dad. I love you." James pulled his son into a tight hug, feeling a warmth he thought he'd lost forever. "I love you too, Ethan, more than anything in this world." As Ethan scampered off to play, James returned his gaze to the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. It was beautiful, he realized. For the first time in months, James allowed himself to truly appreciate the beauty around him. He thought back to the man he'd been before all this, trusting, perhaps naive, believing in the sanctity of family above all else. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, but also stronger. James Broderick had been broken, but he'd remade himself. He'd faced betrayal and come out the other side, not unscathed, but undefeated. As he stood there, watching the city come alive with twinkling lights, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, difficult conversations with Ethan as he grew older, potential encounters with April or Delilah. But James was ready. He'd weathered the storm and emerged stronger for it. He turned away from the window, moving to join Ethan in the living room. This was his life, now simpler in some ways, more complex in others, but undeniably his. James had taken control, had refused to be a victim, and in doing so, he'd reclaimed his future. As he sat down beside his son, James felt a sense of peace settle over him. The anger that had driven him for so long was still there, a banked fire that would never truly extinguish. But alongside it was a newfound strength, a resilience forged in the crucible of betrayal and reforged in the flames of his own determination. James Broderick looked at his son, at the life they would build together, and for the first time in months, he smiled. It was a small smile, tinged with the wisdom of hard-won experience, but it was real. And in that moment, James knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. Not as a husband, not as a father to two, but as a man who had lost everything and rebuilt himself from the ground up. A man who would never again put his trust in the hands of those who had proven unworthy. This was his new beginning. And this time, James Broderick was in control.